Good morning. Welcome to Bradford Health Services' fourth and final education event for the year 2025. I am Zach Ludwig. I'm the Vice President of Clinical Services and Accreditation for Bradford Health Services. I will be introducing and closing out our session this morning. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Bradford hosts these webinars on a quarterly schedule. We are already in the planning phases for 2026. We would like to hear from you about any feedback you'd like to see as we're developing our topics for next year. So please use the opportunity to give us that feedback in your survey evaluation that you'll receive at the conclusion of today's training. Before I introduce today's session, I want to share some important information with you. You are viewing this in the webinar format, which means that you can see the presenters, but your video and audio are off. Please use either the chat or the Q&A functions located on your screen to ask questions regarding anything discussed during the session today or to communicate with our presenter or our support team. I see that a lot of you are checking in the chat today. Nice to see so many familiar names. You do not have to put anything in the chat in order to get credit for being here today. Your enrollment through the registration and your presence in the session is how we prove that you are present. But we'd still like to hear from you. Good morning to all who are chatting. At the end of the presentation, we will have a discussion where questions that we receive throughout the presentation are answered at that time if they're not already answered during the presentation. Please note that you will receive a post-session email that's going to include a link to the materials presented and referenced today, as well as a link to the video recording of today's presentation and a link and a copy of the PDF of the PowerPoint. Today's session is eligible for 3 continuing education hours. Bradford Health Services is providing continuing education contact hours to you at no charge. In order to get the credit, all you must do is attend today and then complete that post-survey evaluation. You're going to get that in the email at the end of today's presentation. The survey link will be open for 30 days. You must complete the evaluation in order to receive a certificate of attendance. Once you've submitted the survey, give us about 2 weeks in order to process that, and you'll get your certificate via email. If after 2 weeks you do not receive after 2 weeks you do not receive your certificate, please email us. If you do a late submission of your evaluation, meaning after 30 days from today, it will not be accepted. So therefore, you will not get continuing education credit. Make sure you complete those evaluations as soon as possible. Recommend do it today. Get it off your to-do list. If you would like to complete that survey link immediately after today's survey, we will be putting it in the chat so you can capture it, so you don't even have to wait on that email. We are expecting a large attendance today, so please then give us those 2 weeks to process time for your certificate. We talk a lot about certificates. I wonder if we run into problems with certificates or questions about it before. This is a very important thing. Okay. Big thing for us to know in the immediate. This is a 3-hour session, and if we have technical difficulties where we are closed out of the session because of internet mishaps or the power blips, and we cannot immediately get back into the session, then you will receive email with instructions about future opportunities and how we might be able to make up the credit that we're allotting for today. So if you are bumped out, please join back in. Many times this is on the user side, not necessarily our systems going down and our inability to present. So please join back as quick as you can. If you're not able to reach us, please send us an email. Okay, now that we have the major housekeeping out of the way, I want to introduce our session. We are excited to introduce today's session called Cannot versus Will Not: Understanding Resistance in Substance Abuse Treatment. Our presenter today is Heidi Vogt, founder and executive director of the Chapter House in Dallas, Texas, a full-service, sober living environment for men in early recovery. Chapter House became affiliated with Bradford Health Services earlier this year, and we're very pleased today to highlight the program and the expertise that's now part of our extended family of services. Heidi's going to share with you more information about her experience and background. It's my pleasure to turn the session over to her this morning. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Zach. Welcome, everybody. It's fun to see the chat. I'm going to have to turn it off here so I don't get distracted. But I'm reading where everybody's from. So many people from Alabama, which is fun. A fun fact about me is I actually went to Samford in Birmingham for my freshman year of college. So I got to spend some time in Alabama and and loved my time there. So
Hey, that happens.
okay. So anyway, as I was saying, I live in Dallas. So, but I did go to Sanford and Birmingham for a year and have some connections to the deep South, as I would say. My sister lived in Atlanta, Georgia for years, and my niece just graduated from Ole Miss. So it seems like there's a big deep South attendance on here. So I'm excited about that. I've lived in Dallas my whole life. Unfortunately, the Cowboys had a terrible game last night, if any of you watched. So, we're still rooting for them. So, I have a 13-year-old son, and I've got a combined degree in theology and counseling. So, that's a kind of a fun fact about me from Dallas Theological Seminary. So, that's given me some different opportunities, especially at the beginning of my career. I love all things artistic and creative. I'm an active member at my church. I've got two dogs with a face only a mother could love. And here's a little bit about my career. I've worked in substance abuse treatment for 23 years. I started my career at a nonprofit women's program with pregnant and parenting women and children. A lot of them were court and CPS mandated. Women were allowed to bring their children with them and could come if they were pregnant. So started my career there and then went on to do something very different, work in an ultra long-term residential treatment center for clients with a history of significant chronic relapse. And that was a private pay facility. So very different from the facility I'd worked at before then. And then as of late, in the last 11 years, I have been the founder and the owner of an extended care program here in Dallas for young adult men with complicating therapeutic and psychiatric issues. And like Zach said, just recently, my program was acquired by Bradford, hence my involvement today. But I still act as the clinical director and executive director of this program, and am loving being part of the Bradford family. I have facilitated over 100 therapeutic family workshops in my career. Done a lot of speaking. I also have a small private practice. And so I serve on the several boards in the Dallas community, and have done a lot of consulting for compliance issues as well. And so the end of the point is, I ended this with, I can safely say I'm an expert in my field, which is a funny way of saying that's the reason I'm here today. So um, how I was raised in this industry, and I don't know how many of you work in, addiction treatment centers specifically versus private practice settings or detox settings, but I was raised in this industry in a very specific way. I worked in treatment centers at the beginning of my career that were very hardcore 12 step. And programs that there was a very narrow path. If a client was not willing to follow, kind of the program that was laid in front of them, we would take them to the bus stop. It was like, hey, you can get on board or you can get out. Um, any resistance that we would experience, what we always viewed as kind of a lack of willingness and a moral deficiency. It was very much like, hey, this person's either willing or they're not. We would roll our eyes and talk crap about difficult clients, kind of during staff meetings. And treatment was a very narrow road. There was no room for deviations. Again, it seemed very black and white. And again, this this is the way it seems like I was raised. This is also my own immaturity at times, but I've worked in a variety of facilities that had different philosophies. And I very much, kind of grew up in this industry believing that we actually used to say at one of the facilities I worked at, when they would ask the success rate, what are your statistics? What are your success rate? We would say one recovery per person if willing, which is a great statement. But again, it was very much based on, the success of this situation is how willing and ready the client is. Tough love, a lot of it was like, hey, maybe they're just not done. Maybe they're not ready. Maybe they need to experience some more pain. And what I want to say about this kind of model is that it works beautifully with a very specific person who is intelligent, resilient, has high emotional capacity, and little to no dual diagnosis. And it's actually a luxury to be able to kind of have this real black and white viewpoint, and it can work smashingly, with somebody, But I think the reason that my mind has changed and my heart has softened a lot over the years, and this is a topic that I'm passionate about. Is because what I've experienced is that individuals can be resistant and get labeled resistant for many reasons other than just being unwilling. A lot of clients that we just write off, they're not being oppositional or defiant, they're just limited. And that is something that has really, really changed in my perception over the last 20 years. And has become a real soapbox for me. And understanding as much as I learned in school about, kind of this Rogerian idea of unconditional positive regard, really understanding practically what that looks like, that's not just a theory, that even the most difficult clients deserve help. So why I am passionate about this topic. I see treatment centers and sober livings have a tendency to punish clients for being resistant and difficult, often overlooking the real limitations the client is living with. Um, and I see this every day. And a lot of this passion comes from the type of facility that I run here in Dallas. We work with guys that are particularly difficult and honestly don't they get sent to us a lot of times because no one else can or will work with them. Treatment centers love to be elitist and reserve their energy for highly intelligent and capable people who can easily grasp the concepts of recovery. And some of this is human nature. This isn't necessarily, good, bad, right, or wrong, but it's even as a private practice therapist. I mean, it's easier to work with clients that are intelligent. It's easier to work with clients that can easily understand concepts. I mean, that's just easier. It's more fun. And so I think as by nature, it's just we reserve our energy and the best of ourselves, for clients that are like that. But unfortunately, I see a lot of guys slip through the cracks because of that. There's a huge population of clients that are slipping through the cracks and not getting help. I talk to parents every week who are desperate to find help for their sons. Their sons continue to keep getting kicked out of programs. They keep leaving, and they're desperate to find a facility that can help. Staff often get frustrated and write off tough clients instead of leaning into the compassion, the patience, and the accommodations that may be involved in helping. Um, okay, so reality check. And this is why, I was telling the Bradford team earlier that I'm going to share, if any of you guys want a copy of this PowerPoint at the end today, I will happily share it, and you can modify it, make it your own for your facility if it makes sense for you. Because the reality check is that the clients at our treatment centers often spend the most time with our least experienced, least trained, and lowest paid staff members. The staff members that are dealing with most of the resistance are our direct care staff. And again, I think that's a reality that a lot of us live with, is that the best of our program, the most time that these guys spend is usually after hours, with the staff members that are driving them to meetings or that are doing their drug tests or that are helping them clean their rooms. And the actual interaction with the therapeutic staff is fairly limited, and they leave. They're not there on the weekends, they're not there in the evenings. And so being able to equip the staff at facilities all the way down, the maintenance man, the drivers, the treatment techs, the nurses aides, recovery managers, sober living house managers, etc. I really hope that this training can serve as a resource for those of you here that are in facilities that have robust staff, from top to bottom, and that we can help deepen their understanding and increase the tools in their toolkit when dealing with resistance. Okay, so kind of philosophically getting just to basics, I wanted to start this with just sort of looking at when we put somebody in addiction treatment, what is it that we're hoping will happen? What is it that we're hoping we will accomplish? And this was actually interesting for me to kind of put this talk together and really kind of get back to basics and realize, okay, like what are we doing here? What is our actual goal? And I think most of us can agree to some of these that I wrote here. We are trying to help our clients take responsibility for their actions and consequences, even when painful. We are trying to help them be open to feedback, even when it challenges deeply held and distorted beliefs. We're trying to help them be willing to explore uncomfortable truths about themselves and their past. We're trying to help them be honest about feelings, motives, and struggles rather than maintaining a facade. And so these things, I'm gonna show you guys a video clip here in a second, but I'm gonna go back to this for a second. When for those of you that are maybe even in recovery yourselves from addiction, or know people, coworkers, friends, loved ones, family members, former clients that have really bought in and gotten sober and are really doing the deal. This is a lot of times what you see in these people. This is a great description of somebody who's sober and doing the deal. They are, this is, even if you think about the 12-step process, this is a big part of it. It's like people who've been able to take themselves on and make amends and get uncomfortable and take a good hard look at themselves and have like deep insight, that's very, very painful um, and tough. And so this is like the goal. This is, again, that kind of, as a therapist who works in addiction treatment, like, the end all be all that I want for my clients is to get to this place where they're it's like they get it, like they've arrived to this place where like, they finally get it. And so I want to show this clip from the movie Flight. I could not figure out how to get this to not have an ad. So it has a little bit of an ad, but then you'll see. And the reason I'm showing this is because this is that spot that we want our clients to get to where they can have this kind of conversation.
But I'm here, and I'll be here for at least the next 4 or 5 years, and that's fair. I betrayed the public trust. I did. That's how the judge explained it to me. I had betrayed the public trust. The FAA, they took away my pilot's license, and that's fair. My chances of ever flying again are slim to none. And I accept that. I've had a lot of time to think about it, all of it. Been doing some writing. I wrote letters to each of the families that had lost loved ones, and some of them were able to hear my apology. Some of them never will. I also apologize to all the people that tried to help me along the way, but I couldn't or wouldn't listen. People like my wife, my ex-wife. My son. And again, like I said, some of them will never forgive me. Some of them will. But at least I'm sober. I thank God for that. I'm grateful for that. And this is going to sound real stupid coming from a man who's locked up in prison. But for the first time in my life, I'm free.
Okay, so I love that clip because I think it really shows, in a perfect world, what it is that we are hoping for. Oh, where that came from. What we are hoping for from our clients. And after doing this for 23 years, it's indulgent for me, to be able to interact with former clients who have gotten to that point where it's like, oh my gosh, they're just like living their best lives, and they're active in a 12-step program or their church, and they've really, like had this psychic change in how they do life. So I guess the point of my talk today is, so what happens when they can't do this or won't? Like, this is what we saw Denzel Washington doing. It's like, that's where we want people to get. But as we all know that work in this industry, that doesn't happen all that often, unfortunately, where they really like see the truth and they kind of arrive at this point of insight. So what happens when they can't do that or they won't do that? And this is where this idea of my talk's name, cannot versus will not, this exact idea of what I'm talking about was actually presented in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous when it was written in the 30s. And it says, in 1939, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. And so we've been talking about this in the facilities that I've worked at for years. In staff meetings, we'll often say like, you know what, I think he's a can. We actually use it as like a word, like he's a cannot or he's a will not. And we get that from this quote in the Big Book. But I mean, it's incredibly wise and telling, I think, for the work we do, that if you work in this industry long enough, you realize that there really there's a big part of the population that we work with that they cannot do what Denzel Washington just did in that clip. Like, they never are going to get there. And so what do we do with them? I mean, what do we do? And so their chances are less than average, but do they still deserve a chance? These unfortunates are sitting in our treatment center right now. They are impossible at times. They're driving our tech staff crazy. They're leaving our therapists feeling defeated. Their families are hopeless and confused. But do they still deserve our help? And that's become a big topic, at my facility and in our staff meetings. And these impasses that we get to as a staff is well, what now? Yeah, because we want this like idealist idea that they're going to have this like amazing life altering change, but then we get these guys in our facility that don't even have the capacity. For a variety of reasons, which we're going to talk about a little bit today as well. So one of the things I like to do is challenge the beliefs that we have about how we write off our clients. Things like this that you hear at your facility, I'm sure, and I hear at my facility. And again, I always use kind of the metaphor of at our staff meetings, when we're sitting around the table at our staff meeting. They're just not willing when we're talking about a client who's been resistant. They're just not willing. They're just not done yet. He's just manipulating. He's just full of crap. He's just lazy. He just doesn't want it. He's just so entitled. He's just med seeking. So I'm sure that these are things that any of you that work in addiction treatment hear all the time. Notice the word just. And this is my favorite thing to talk about. I often hear the well-meaning staff try to separate specific clients by using these statements as if they've figured them out. Like, oh, this specific guy, he's just med seeking and I'm on to him. Like somehow that reclassifies him into a different category. It happens to me all the time. Like, a counselor will come in my office and say, you know what, I just realized like little Johnny's just manipulating. Like, he's not really having back pain. He's just manipulating. And it's like, oh, like this light bulb goes off in his head. Like somehow that means, and that's where I do that with with staff. I have this process where I'm like, okay, so what does that mean? Like, so now what? Does that mean he doesn't deserve our help? Or does that mean he's bad? Or, what does that mean? And so I started talking about this, the staff excuse, recusal through reclassification. reclassifying the client, that in these moments when a counselor comes in my office and says, oh, I figured it out, he's just full of crap, and he's not actually having back pain or whatever, that the client is at that point reclassified from a patient, someone who with an illness who's seeking healing, to a non-compliant, manipulative, or difficult person, someone who is unwilling to follow the rules. So in that moment, we're reclassifying this. And with that comes shifting responsibility. By reclassifying the client, the staff can shift the burden of failure entirely onto the client. The implicit logic becomes our program is sound. It's that the client's not willing to follow it. Therefore, the failure is theirs, and our obligation to exert further effort is absolved. And so that's a lot of times I go through this kind of Socratic process with staff where I'm like, okay, so then what? Like, if he is full of crap, like he's just full of crap, or he's just this, or he's just here doing time, or he's just here because of court, I figured it out. It's like, okay, well then what? So now do we not have to help him anymore? I mean, what's the end point of this discovery? And what it is really is this shifting of responsibility. This defense mechanism is often a result of staff burnout or compassion fatigue. Working with entrenched, resistant behaviors is exhausting. Labeling the behavior as a personal failing of the client rather than a clinical challenge for the staff provides emotional relief and an excuse to withdraw energy. And I get that. I mean, I've been there. This phrase often heard or implied is they don't want it bad enough. This transfers the focus from the staff's need to adapt their approach to the client's perceived lack of moral fiber or will. So I've got this little grid here, that helps kind of describe it. So in this kind of punitive recusal mindset, we're like, I'm recused of having to help this guy anymore because I discovered that he's full of crap. We're in that mindset, we're believing that resistance is a choice, an act of defiance, or poor character. And the flaw is that it treats a symptom of the illness as an unacceptable behavior requirement for treatment. Like the very illness that they're here seeking help for has suddenly become an unacceptable behavior requirement for treatment. And the staff responsibility becomes to enforce compliance. Whereas if we're focusing on a more of a therapeutic or clinical mindset, the resistance is a symptom of the disease, a defense mechanism, or a sign of ambivalence. The flaw there is that it recognizes that a system designed to treat the disease must anticipate and treat the symptoms of that disease. And the staff responsibility is to engage, explore, and treat the underlying ambivalence and fear that generates resistance. So this is a really, really helpful grid, I think, to talk about with staff. And again, this is something that I drive home constantly. Resistance is a predictable symptom. This is not like some one-off, like, oh my gosh, little Johnny showed up to treatment saying he wanted help, but now he's acting like a butthead. Oh, who knew? It's like, of course, this is what they do. This is by recognizing resistance as a predictable symptom, staff are challenged to shift their approach from confrontation, which increases resistance, to curiosity and collaboration, which promotes engagement. Our commitment must be to hold the therapeutic space consistently, understanding that their resistance is not a personal attack, but rather the visible evidence of the deeply entrenched, unhealthy coping mechanism that landed them in treatment. Our job is not to match their resistance, but to treat it as the disease in action. So there's some serious questions we must ask ourselves. And some of these are questions that I think, those of you that are in management at treatment centers or collaborate with treatment centers, like these are great things to even talk about it in staff meetings and management meetings and things, kind of really take an inventory of your program. When faced with the difficult or non-compliant client, how does our institutional commitment to healing square with the impulse to withhold care or assign blame? And this is, I think this one really kind of is where the rubber meets the road, is looking at, we say we're here and committed to helping clients heal, but how does that add up when the going gets tough? We're dealing with some real difficult clients, and our instinct is to want to withhold care and assign blame. Does the right to treatment end where our patients does? or does true professionalism demand we find a path for the most entrenched and challenging cases? And this is, again, a lot of this depends on, kind of the philosophy of the treatment center. And I'm going to touch on that here in a minute. But it's like as soon as somebody's really, really getting difficult, is it now all of a sudden, and we're really getting tired, now is it at time like, well, he's just got to go. He's got to go to the bus stop. This just isn't working, And again, these are not black and white discussions. These are hard, and we've got to manage milieus, and these are complex things to discuss. If a patient's resistance is the natural outcome of our current program or methods, are we treating them or are we failing to adapt? And I think this is a great kind of inventory for any facility to take. And again, it's this balance of holding true to what we believe works in addiction treatment, right? Like we can't change our whole program just to, cater to clients' resistance, right? Or their demands or their selfishness or whatnot. But at the same time, I think these are important things. I mean, at one time, my facility, we had some very, very rigid phone rules. And we really didn't want the clients. The program I'm talking about was like a year-long program. We really didn't want the clients to have their phones for like the first 6 months. But what we looked at was that we were losing, a ridiculous amount of possible intakes, and then also losing guys, 2 and 3 weeks into the program because they knew the phone thing was just, we just kept banging up against this. We kept banging up against it. And we really had to take an inventory as a facility to look at like, where's the line here? If we're literally unable to help people because they're so resistant to our phone policy, at what point are we failing to adapt? And is there a possibility that we could take a look at our program? And so these are difficult conversations to have because, again, treatment owners and we have passionate beliefs in our philosophy, and I get that, and we're allowed to. Okay, approaches to resistance are often the cause of rifts between clinical and non-clinical staff. If you've worked in this industry, you know that there's always, I actually love this little graphic I have here because I could sit here and think about a million staff meetings I've been in where so many people have different thoughts. And at least in the facilities I've worked at, there's often a rift between kind of the 12-step non-clinical recovery staff, right? Like the guys that are driving the van and taking the guys to meetings, and maybe they're sober themselves. And I always joke that they go on witch hunts. Meaning that, if little Johnny is just, at your facility is, just consistently breaking the rules, and the non-clinical staff is just like disgusted, like, why is this guy even still here? What are we doing? Like, this facility, they're just keeping him for the money. And this is just, and there's like this toxicity that starts happening because they have a belief, that like this should be dealt with in a certain way. Whereas the clinical staff maybe it gets labeled codependent because the clinical staff's trying to work with them on their trauma, and the clinical staff's trying to help them, work through, a process, that they're having with their childhood trauma and things like that. And, yeah, I know he's breaking the rules, but he's really doing some hard work in therapy and And then everyone on the non-clinical staff's rolling their eyes, and then the clinical staff thinks that the non-clinical staff is punitive and that they just want to kick everyone out. And and so these are the causes of these rifts. Non-clinical staff wants to use behavior modification, clinical staff wants to create understanding. And so again, these conversations I think are important, and hence the topic of this training for entire staffs to talk about, what is this idea of like a cannot versus a will not? Because we at times are dealing with people who have limited capacity. Like they cannot follow the rules the way we want them to. They cannot have experiences like we envision them having because they have a variety of limitations. Do they deserve help? Do they get to be at our facility? These are important things to talk about. Everyone's gossiping, taking sides. Like I said, it creates this toxicity. A couple of points, and I mentioned this. I'm not suggesting that all treatment centers must work with the most resistant clients. treatment centers get to have their own philosophies, and they get to have their own tolerance levels, and they get to be true to their own convictions. I have worked with and consulted with facilities all over the country. And one of the things I love about that is that treatment centers have, all different kinds of founders and belief systems and philosophies behind it. One facility is like trenched in the 12 steps in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's a very, narrow road. And if you don't get on board with like their exact way, you can't be there. And another facility is very trauma based and very, has an owner who has a very specific belief and a very specific type of therapy. And then we've got facilities over here that really believe in medication assisted therapy and so everybody gets to, like, there's a reason we have lots of different facilities that have different convictions and different philosophies. So I'm not suggesting that every facility has to just be like all inclusive of every type of resistant client, but my hope is that this presentation creates conversations and thoughtful ways to analyze your program and staff. And that's a lot of, what my hope is. The other thing I just wanted to say is, as you can already tell, this is not like a research presentation. I'm not going to be going over a lot of like new statistics and addiction, health and things like that. This is a practical overview of things my team and I found helpful over many years of working in addiction treatment. I told a friend this morning that I should have titled this talk, Thoughts on Addiction, Thoughts from My 23 Years in This Industry is essentially what this talk is. So 5 reasons for resistance. And so this is what I've talked about, that one of the things that I drive home a lot is that there is, the cannots versus the will nots. And either way, whether somebody kind of cannot have this experience we're wanting them to, or they will not, there is always going to be people that are limited and they're not working with like the same toolkit that maybe we hope they were and they hope they are, but they're just not. They're not working with that same toolkit. And so I'm going to hit on kind of the top 5 of these today. We're going to talk about conscious resistance. We're going to talk about distorted resistance. We're going to talk about personality disorders. We're going to talk about mental illness. And we're going to talk about neurodivergence and brain trauma. I'm going to talk about number 1, and then we're going to take a break, and then we'll go through 2 through 5. So, okay, conscious resistance. This is kind of the word that I don't even think this is like an official word. I just named it this, conscious resistance. This is like your run-of-the-mill resistance. This is like your client that comes in that's a deliberate, often verbal or openly behavioral opposition to the treatment plan, the counselor, or the goal of abstinence. It stems from the client's current lack of internal motivation or a direct conflict with the demands of the program. So this is not like a particularly complicated type of resistance. This is just your run-of-the-mill person who comes into treatment who's like maybe not ready, doesn't really want it. This just isn't, this is your basic unwillingness, stubbornness, opposition to change. This resistance is an expression of client's ambivalence about change. How conscious resistance shows up in treatment settings. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Direct argumentation. The client directly challenges the staff, questions the utility of group therapy, or debates the necessity of restrictions. And so this is, again, very, very common and very, very typical. Client comes in, they, were forced into treatment because of a legal situation or because of CPS or because of, their wife's going to leave them or their job made them take a leave of absence, and they don't really think they have a problem. They're not really into this. It shows up as non-compliance. They refuse to do assignments. They deliberately violate program rules. They just don't want to do this. Like, this isn't where they want to be. They don't want to be doing this right now. They'd rather be somewhere else. They'd rather be doing something else. They're not bought in. They're not bought into their need for change or for their need for sobriety. They think that everybody's overreacting. This just isn't the problem that everybody thinks it is. This is all kind of an overreaction or a big mistake. Somehow this isn't where they're supposed to be. The external locus of control. They repeatedly state that they are only there because of an external mandate. Their court, job, family, they do not genuinely want to change. And more often than not, we see this in early stage addicts and alcoholics. And so I think this is an important distinction to make. So, we're going to see this in guys that are maybe younger, guys that, or men and women that this is their first or second time in treatment. This is, someone who's, I see a lot of guys in their 20s that, things didn't go well at college, or, something's gone on with, someone gets a DWI, and this is their kind of their first attempt at getting sober, or the first time someone's really told them they need to. And they're just not there. They're not there yet. And so, again, this one isn't like a super complex one, but I think it's an important one to talk about. This one is this type of resistance is the easiest to work with, because these are the ones that a lot of the treatment modalities that we've been taught are going to be more effective with this type. Okay, I'm going to show this clip from A Million Little Pieces, the film.
Look, truth is, I don't need to be here. I'm not like these other people. I had an accident, okay, and everyone's making a big deal out of nothing.
Is it really nothing?
It's been a bad time recently. I'll admit that. I just need some time to figure it out.
That's exactly what this time is.
No, this is about AA. It's dog shit, if you really want to know what I think.
I don't. I know that this program works, and it seems to me you might not have given it a try.
Because there's no fucking point. You know why? Because it's based around God, and I don't believe in God.
God, higher power, a power greater than yourself.
Either way, however you want to put it, higher power, but what you actually mean is God. Right?
Mr. Fry, I'm going to level with you. We are a drug rehabilitation center whose sole purpose is to help addicts. Not Christians or Jews or Muslims or Buddhists, but addicts. And every addict needs structure. They need a strong foundation and support system if they ever hope to survive.
I'm not an addict. I'm not an addict. Okay?
Okay.
I might be fucked up. I'm not an addict.
Well, we have a saying here, it's one day at a time. And in about 10 minutes is breakfast.
All right. I love that clip. It's just like a classic conversation, that you might have in treatment, and it's a great, it's just, again, conscious resistance. It doesn't seem like he's particularly mentally ill. It doesn't seem like he's got a whole lot other stuff going on, which I'm going to talk about, the neurodivergence, the mental illness, personality disorders. He's just not there. He's not there. He doesn't understand why everyone thinks there's a problem. So how to help? Again, none of this is like new information that I'm giving you guys. I'm just kind of recapping. This is like your perfect situation for motivational interviewing. These are the ideal clients, for, the reflective listening, developing discrepancy, helping them move through the stages of change with good clinical skill. The other thing is education and planting seeds, educating on the disease of alcoholism. A lot of guys that come in for a 30-day stint of treatment, like this guy on the video, they're probably, and again, a lot of it's like living in reality. Like that guy maybe he's not ready, maybe he's not going to get sober this time. But what we can do is educate them. We can plant seeds, and we can, create a safe place where we start to give him kind of a basic understanding of what addiction is, and what does it look like when it does become a problem, and how do you know how to qualify yourself. And so I think that's a big part of it. Also acknowledging autonomy, emphasizing that, the ultimate decision to change is theirs. Nobody can do that for you. And I think that's a big part of that motivational interviewing process is helping them find their own motivation and helping them work through that ambivalence and those stages of change Themselves. Exposure to 12-step recovery. Again, these are these are people who, kind of theoretically are like the perfect candidates for 12-step recovery. 12-step recovery can be tough for people with mental illness and people with neurodivergence and things like that. But for this kind of guy, I mean, this is kind of what the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous was written for, is somebody who doesn't really understand what's happening to them. They're resisting it and they're not really sure, kind of how to move forward. And so just exposing them, bringing meetings into your facility, exposing them to the literature, exposing them to the basic concepts of what it means to be part of a 12-step group, what is a sponsor, and just basic education. And then developing rapport, making sure that they have a safe place to call when they are ready. And maybe they're going to get sober at this 30-day treatment they're in right now, and maybe they're not, but I can't tell you how many times I'm surprised when I work with a guy like this, that a year later, 18 months later, they leave after treatment. And as we all knew, like they don't make it. They start smoking weed again, or they go back out and start drinking. But then maybe 18 months later, they get another DWI, or life's not going well. And as much as they said they hated being at our facility, and as much as they hated all of us, and this was all bullshit, none of us knew what we were doing, and this place was a prison, and blah, 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 suddenly they call us. And those moments are always really, really beautiful, because even though the client is in pain, I know that we did something right, and that they remember us, and they remember that, oh, that place, I think they maybe were onto something, and they were actually trying to help me. And I think maybe they knew what I was struggling with before I knew, and they were trying to help me. And so just developing rapport, making sure that they have a safe place to call when they are ready, I think is really, really important with this type of conscious resistance. And again, one of the things, again, I talked a lot about educating our line staff, our direct care staff, our drivers, our med techs, our house managers, things like that. I think that, these clients can be tough to work with. They're like butt heads, they don't want to be here. I mean, again, sometimes I think, zooming out and just being honest with our staff and acknowledging, that, hey, man, like we're doing a really hard job here. We're working with people who don't want what we're offering. Like they don't want to be here. They feel like they're in prison and they hate us. And I think just acknowledging yes, that is the disease of addiction. Like that is what we literally show up to work every day to do this exact thing, to deal with these clients that hate us and don't want to be here. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and educate clients on that, because clients don't show up well. And again, back to some of the stuff I talked about earlier, that learning a tolerance level for that takes some growing pains, because a lot of people that are newer in this industry expect people to show up and want something different and be ready to do something different. If they're not willing to do something different, then we should just take them to the bus stop. And it's like, I don't know, should we? I mean, or do they deserve help even though they're confused and they don't understand what's going on yet and they don't know what's wrong with them? And they've landed here. And so how can we help? And do they matter? Do they matter even though they're hard? And do they matter even though they're exhausting and they're rude? And so I think you really focusing on how to help our staff not write these guys off because they're hard to work with is the order of the day. This is a great clip that I'm going to show from Girl Interrupted that really talks about ambivalence, and I think how we can really use motivational interviewing with these types of resistant clients.
With Revolut, you can grow your money faster with up to 5.5% APY.
These are the Nuance Audio glasses, and they're not just stylish, they actually help you hear better as well.
Am I in trouble for kissing an orderly or giving my boyfriend a blowjob?
Melvin says you have some very interesting theories about your illness. You believe there is a mystical undertow in life, quicksands, of shadows.
Yeah, and another one of my theories is that you people don't know what you're doing.
Still, you acknowledge there is a problem coping with this quicksand.
You know, I have a problem coping with this hospital. I want to leave.
I can't do that.
I signed myself in. I should be able to sign myself out.
You signed yourself into our care. We decide when you leave. You're not ready for it, Susanna. Your progress has plateaued. Does that disappoint you?
I'm ambivalent. In fact, that's my new favorite word.
Do you know what that means, ambivalence?
I don't care.
If it's your favorite word, I would have thought you
It
would.
means I don't care. That's what it means.
On the contrary, Susanna, ambivalence suggests strong feelings in opposition. The prefix, as in ambidextrous, means both. The rest of it, in Latin, means vigor. The word suggests that you are torn between two opposing courses of action.
Will I stay or will I go?
Am I sane or am I crazy?
Those aren't courses of action.
They can be, dear. For some.
Well, then, it's the wrong word.
No. I think it's perfect. Quis hic locus quae regia, quae mundis plaga. What world is this? What
Sorry.
kingdom? What shores of what worlds? It's a very big question you're faced with, Susanna. The choice of your life. How much will you indulge in your flaws? What are your flaws? Are they flaws? If you embrace them, will you commit yourself to hospital for life? Big questions, big decisions. Not surprising you profess carelessness about them.
Is that it?
For now.
All right. I absolutely love that clip when talking about motivational interviewing. There's a quote in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that talks about disturbing them. It's talking about working with others in the 12-step rooms and, world. And they say, if your talk has been sane, quiet, and full of human understanding, you have perhaps made a friend. Maybe you have disturbed him about the question of alcoholism. This is all to the good. The more hopeless he feels, the better. He will be more likely to follow your suggestions. And so I love this idea. We talk about this a lot at my facility, that maybe you have disturbed him about the question of alcoholism. And I think so much of that, and I think with good technique and motivational interviewing, we get to do that. We get to slow down and just get curious and have conversations. And with people that have that level of conscious resistance, I think that's really, really important to create space and safety for them to figure out what's wrong with them. They're not showing up knowing what's going on and knowing what's wrong with them. So, okay. So next is going to be distorted resistance. I was going to look at the chat and see about questions, Q&A, before we take a little break. Okay, let me see. Given that these individuals have been subjecting their brains to substances for years, perhaps decades, what are their actual comprehension levels of what's going on about themselves in initial treatment? And I'm gonna talk about that a little bit. That's a great question. Thank you for that. That's a lot of the conversations that I have with my staff when it comes to capacity. And honestly, sometimes we have difficult conversations about just intelligence levels, that at a certain point we have to be honest about what we're dealing with when it comes to an individual's functioning capacity, intelligence levels, and their ability to respond to insight-oriented treatment. And even the 12 steps is very insight-oriented. And so when we're dealing with somebody that has, brain damage, they're going through a level of kind of detox or withdrawals, depending on what medications they're on. I mean, all of these things make it difficult for, again, back to that original video I showed of Denzel Washington, for them to have this this life-altering, amazing, spiritual experience where they see the truth of everything that they've done in their whole lives. I mean, it's very, very difficult. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. So, are there any other questions before I take a break? And I'll also answer some questions after the break. So if you guys want to share any questions or thoughts you have, let's just take a 10-minute break. And then we'll hop back on and do, the next one is my favorite one, where we're going to talk about distortive resistance. So let's come back in 10 minutes. All right. Okay, well, let's get started again. I want to address and answer. Yes, you will get a copy of the slides, and I have the chat up now. I got a little flustered when I couldn't start my PowerPoint at the beginning, and now I've got the chat up. So hopefully I can interact with you guys a little bit more. I want to talk about a couple of these questions from somebody. Do you think the lack of promoting the difference between ability and willingness unfortunately promotes the social stereotype that an addict is an addict because they don't want to change? Also, what is your opinion on harm reduction versus complete abstinence from using? Wow, those are big ones. I could do a whole 3-hour talk just on some of that. But I don't know that I think it promotes the stereotype that an addict is an addict because they don't want to change. But I think some of what I'm trying to promote maybe in this is the conversation that the reason why people don't want to change isn't always just because I keep using the word butthead, but the reason why they're an addict or they don't want to change isn't just because they're just resistant. Like we throw that word around, like that there's a lot of stuff going on here, and which goes back to the cannot versus will not, which I want to dive into a little bit more, because I think it's important. I mean, again, even in 1939, as the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous were writing the big book, I mean, they identified that there was like a sect of the population of addicts that literally, like they even identified, like they cannot have the level of honesty that is necessary to get sober. They can't do it. It doesn't exist inside of them. And again, it's because there are such unfortunates, is what it says. There are those, and there's also those that have grave and emotional mental disorders, but some of them can still recover if they have the capacity to be honest. So, there's this idea of their capacity to be honest, and be honest, not just to the, like literal, just not telling lies, but being honest to their innermost self and having the ability for insight, and again, unpacking some of that, which we're about to do, like personality disorders, neurodivergence, the incapacity because of mental illness. I mean, these things are really complex. And again, I think that resistant clients who don't get well get labeled as just bad. And again, in treatment settings, I think they get labeled as just like, well, they're just unwilling. They're just unwilling. And I think that is damaging, to have that stereotype where it's like, hey, maybe they're not unwilling. Maybe they literally aren't capable. Like they literally don't have the capacity. And again, does that mean that we don't help them? And are they, do we still keep them? I mean, maybe they're never going to have a lifetime of sobriety, but do they deserve to be in our facility for the next 30 days? Do they deserve to have individual therapy with a private practice counselor? I mean, do they still deserve help? And what do we do with those people? So, And to your question, what is your opinion on harm reduction versus complete abstinence from using? I mean, that's like, that's the $1 million question. And like I said, if you saw how I said I was raised in this industry, I personally was raised in this industry as a very like 12-step staunch abstinence based practitioner. And so, but my position has softened over the years in a lot of ways. And a lot of that's just because I worked with so many clients that weren't able or willing to follow this narrow road we were putting in front of them. And I absolutely think that there's a place for MAT and harm reduction and alternative recovery programs other than the 12 steps. And so absolutely. So, okay, another one I see here. I've worked in sober living since 2020. We often find that resistance to 12-step groups can be navigated by suggesting alternative groups such as SMART and Dharma. Have you had success with clients trying 12-step alternatives at your agency? Absolutely. So we, and this is a tough one, right? Because like I personally love the 12 steps. I've had a personal experience with the 12 steps and bought in kind of personally. And so again, this has been part of my journey as a professional, is realizing like, oh, well, it doesn't click with everybody else, and it doesn't make sense to everybody else. And some people aren't capable for a variety of reasons. And so absolutely. I mean, I think having the ability to provide SMART recovery Dharma, celebrate recovery, faith-based alternatives, is really, really important. So, okay. And I see in the chat too about mental illness, intellectual disabilities. We're going to talk about that. I'm about to go into that. And yeah, I think I see a lot of success with that population. We just have to work with them different. And I think being able to manage expectations is the biggest issue that we deal with. So, okay, let me see. I know there's a lot of discussion about denial. And I want to talk a little bit about that when it comes to the stages of change before we dive into this next section. One of the things I think is really important to acknowledge is that for those of us that have gotten degrees in counseling, and substance abuse treatment, that we get a lot of education on, the stages of change, like when somebody's at the action stage of change, right? Like when someone comes in and they're ready to do, like, what do we do? How do we develop these amazing treatment plans? And what modalities do we use? But I think we lack education in what do we do when somebody shows up at our door who's pre-contemplative and has no idea what's going on, and someone has told them they need to go get some help, and they don't even know why. And they even as a private practice counselor, at times it's funny because I deal with clients that come to my facility that it's so obvious, and there's kind of no question by the time they get to my program that there's a major problem going on in their life and that they need help. And then a couple hours a week, I have this small private practice, and I go work with clients that come in and are in such a different spot where it's like, well, my wife thinks I might have a little problem with drinking. And so we get to spend 6 months exploring, well, what would that mean? And what does that mean to you? And do you think you have a problem with drinking? And really exploring and being curious. And so I think that the skill set of being able to hold space for somebody when they're in that pre-contemplative space is something that is missed a lot of times. And also really understanding like what does qualify you as an addict and what does that mean? And so we don't get a lot of training on this. And so I think it's an important thing to continue to discuss, and it disarms people. And I think it disarms, again, a lot of our non-clinical staff too, because they just assume that if you've showed up at our treatment facility that we're here, because you need help. And that's just not always the case. And it can be very disarming. Like, well, what do we do now? He says he doesn't need help, and a lot of times that's that point where everybody thinks like, well, I guess we should kick him out. And it's like, well, no, we're going to help him move through these stages of change through a process of good skill. And then similar to that, the discussion I think came up, mandated treatment versus non-mandated, and there's so much research, and a lot of this research is actually discussed, in a lot of the motivational interviewing training. About at the end of the day, research shows that it doesn't really make it. Success rates don't change whether it's mandated or not. That you can have as much of an experience and get well whether it's mandated or not. And so I think that's always a fascinating, kind of line of research to dive into, because at the end of the day, what matters is whether you do it or you don't. And again, that goes back to, my old boss who used to say 1 recovery per person if wanted. It doesn't really matter the circumstances, but oftentimes you will see a difference in how someone shows up in treatment, whether they're mandated or not. You definitely have more leverage when somebody is mandated. And so sometimes you get into that, is this real compliance versus surrender? And so that's always an interesting topic, that we talk about in staff meeting, as well. Are we looking at, is he really surrendered to this process, or is he just going through the motions? And sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes going through the motions is just as effective, because if you act as if, you're going to get some benefits. So, okay. So let me dive into this, because this is going to be some good stuff, as we talk about distorted resistance. And again, this is just a name that I came up with. This isn't, like a real name, but it's just kind of what I call it. And this is, it's kind of one I often say when we get alcoholics in front of me, it's like there is an alcoholic and then there's like an alcoholic. And I'm sure a lot of you guys know what I'm talking about, but, when we get somebody in, it can be almost alarming to see the level of distortion that somebody has going on in their brain when they are struggling with like end stage alcoholism. So this is kind of how I describe it. These clients are being literally driven by a powerful disease that is larger than their ability to reason. They're without defense. They have no awareness of what's driving them. They believe they want to get better or are getting better, while their brain is still deluding them about what is necessary to get better. I liken it to almost being possessed. It is unnerving to sit in the presence of someone who is afflicted with this. So I have, again, and this is different from the client that I was talking about earlier with kind of your run-of-the-mill resistance, where it's like, I don't want to be here, I don't need this. This is stupid. This is defined a little bit different. And this is oftentimes we see this in end stage alcoholism. So I'm gonna talk about like kind of who we see this in. But before I do that, I want to show this clip. And I don't know if any of you guys are Marvel fans, but my son and I love Marvel movies. And I in recent years have started really talking about alcoholism and kind of the disease of addiction like Venom. So I don't know if any of you like the Venom movies, but if you haven't seen it, you're about to see a little bit. It genuinely, there are times that I can sit with a client and I know that it's almost like they have a symbiote inside of them. And it's like I'm not even talking to them. I'm talking to the diseases of alcoholism that's telling them lies. And so I want to talk to you guys a little bit about that after we watch this clip. This is when Venom, kind of shows up, and that symbiote kind of takes control and enters into his body. And so I liken this to alcoholism as you guys watch this.
My legs. Oh my God, my legs were broken. Now they're not broken. What is happening?
What the hell are you? I
you bit somebody's head off.
Fuel in the tank. Listen carefully, Eddie. You did not find us. We found you. Think of yourself as my ride.
Where are you going?
We need Carlton Drake's rocket. You remember him?
How do you even know about that?
I know everything, Eddie.
You do?
Everything about you.
How?
I am inside your head. You are a loser, Eddie.
You gonna eat anybody else?
Most likely.
Oh, God.
That is why we are here. Cooperate, and you might just survive. That is the deal.
All right. So my favorite part of that clip is when he says, think of yourself as my ride. And that is such a good way to describe alcoholism and the disease of alcoholism. I can't tell you how many times I sit down with somebody in kind of a retention meeting where they're trying to describe to me, why they don't need to be in treatment anymore. And they're sitting there describing to me the most insane things that in light of their current situation make no sense. They're facing, pancreatitis, liver failure. They're on the liver transplant list. They've lost their career. They've lost their spouse. They've lost everything. But they sit and look me straight in the face. And I can tell that they believe it, that, all they need to do is just get back to their house, and that they're going to go to meetings, and they don't need to be in treatment anymore. And sit there with like a dead look on their face. And I walk out of my office and I just think like, it's like they're not even there. It's like I'm talking to Venom. And so, I don't know how many of you guys relate to that. I could see a few of you on the chat that said you could see the connection. And I know a couple of you on this chat were talking about, how does this relate to non-addiction? I'm certain that, and again, I'll share this PowerPoint with anyone that wants it, that this kind of idea of this discussion could be translated into all kinds of behavioral healthcare settings. Obviously this specific talk today is about addiction, and that's certainly my area of expertise. But I think when dealing with just basic manipulation, basic behavioral health issues, resistance shows up in all of that. And so looking at, the types of resistance and the reasons for resistance, ultimately always boils down to, right, like what does it mean to change, and what are those stages of change, and what are the motivating factors, and what are the limitations getting in somebody's way. And so yeah, I'd love to hear more about that, and some of you guys, maybe you'll do the next one of the 2026 talks on that. So distorted resistance, how it shows up in treatment settings. So this is typically advanced disease. When I'm talking about these guys that have their venom talking for them, they're usually in clients with end-stage alcoholism and addiction. And honestly, just based on my experience, a lot of times it's specific to alcoholism. Like I see this much more in more advanced alcoholism than even drug addiction. Again, I don't have a lot of research to back that up. It's just my experience. It's just what I've seen. Acceptance. So this is, again, back to the first one we talked about with conscious resistance, and even that video clip where he's like, I'm not an addict. Like this, I had an accident. I'm not an addict. These guys are different. These guys are actually in full acceptance of their diagnosis of alcoholism and addiction. Like we're not arguing that. They know that they're beaten down, they're broken, they're quiet. And while they say they want to get better, there's often a resignation that they know they're probably going to die of alcoholism. They can't picture their life with or without substances. They are literally being driven, by a force that is bigger than themselves, which is the disease of alcoholism. There are patients that are, I'm looking at the chat, there's patients that are attached to their diagnosis like it's a part of their identity. Absolutely. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, personality disorders as well. Lack of surrender. The point of resistance with people that I'm talking about with distorted resistance usually lies in what is suggested for treatment, and that their disease won't let them just surrender their job, their car, their relationship, etc. So the point of contention isn't like, I'm not an addict, I'm not an alcoholic. It's like the point of contention is like, hey, you really need to move into sober living for the next year if you want to get well and live and recover from pancreatitis and the disease of addiction. And they are the disease will not let them surrender to that truth. They will not let them surrender. No, I just need to get back to work. No, I just need to get back to my job. No, I've got a mortgage. And so whatever it is, it's like we're over here fighting for their lives, and like that disease that's in them just will not let them surrender to the suggestions of what's going to actually help them get well. They are pathologically stubborn. They minimize the need for radical change in their lives because these clients are often alcoholic. A lot of times they still have jobs and homes. And so again, this is kind of a nuance where the younger guys that are maybe it's their first or second time in treatment, a lot of them, it's like their lives are just kind of a shit show. Not sorry for my French, but they don't have a home. They're, living on friends' couches. There's nothing to go back to. So there's not, there's not a lot to fight for. With this other type of client I'm talking about, that, they're oddly successful in certain parts of their lives. And because, they're not living the criminal lifestyle that comes along with drug addiction, they're often alcoholics. They've been able to pull off still having the job. They are able to pull off still having their home. And so that's the point of resistance that we run into a lot with these guys. And that they just, they will not surrender the things that they need to surrender. Going through the motions. While they may be compliant, they remain emotionally distant and refuse to connect the material to their own life, treating the process as a meaningless bureaucratic hoop to jump through. They'll even show up as leaders in the community and hold others accountable and often believe they are taking the necessary steps for recovery. But the truth is, when the rubber meets the road, they are still working on their own plan. So I'm curious if any of you guys want to let me know in the chat if any of you guys, connect to kind of this difference between, it's like, okay, there's guys that are alcoholics, and then there's guys that are like death stage alcoholics that have lost the ability to be able to separate anything that's true from anything that's false. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about this type of alcoholic, it being beyond human aid. It says, the fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice and drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. With this sort of thinking, it is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he has probably placed himself beyond human aid, and unless locked up, may die or go permanently insane. And so, I mean, this is the type of alcoholic that they identified in 1939 when they were writing the big book. The alcoholic symbiote. So back to my venom metaphor. I can't tell you how many times I walk out of a retention meeting with a client knowing that I was not dealing with the client, but I was dealing with their disease. It's like they're not even there. And it's actually alarming and kind of disarming experience to have when you realize, that, gosh, I'm not even talking to them. It's very sad and overwhelming at times. As the bond deepens, the symbiote starts to exert its will, influencing the host's thoughts, promoting aggression, and demanding to be warned. The host loses agency and the ability to control its influence. Alcoholism is defined by the loss of control and a compulsive need to drink, despite negative consequences. The initial choice to drink evolves into a powerful, uncontrollable craving that hijacks the brain's reward system, demanding to be fed. Okay, so we're going to watch one more clip of Venom. And I call it Resisting Treatment Without Their Own Permission.
When you've got a classic ride, you need tools you trust. Whether you drive it every day or only take it out on the biggest night of the year, count on Harbor Freight, your holiday destination. Do not open that door.
Huh?
Stay put. Hey, Eddie.
Who the hell is this guy?
I'm gonna need Mr. Drake's property back.
Oh,
What are you doing?
I'm putting my hands up.
You are making us look bad.
No, I am not.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not.
Why would you do that?
Because it is a very sensible thing to do.
Eddie?
I will take care of this myself.
Eddie, where's the bug? Take him down.
I'm so sorry about your friends. What is that?
Not what?
Oh. Shit.
Outstanding. Now, let's bite all the heads off and pile them up in the corner.
Why would we do that?
Pile of bodies. Pile of heads.
What the shit, man?
What the hell? Dude, how did you do that?
Apparently I have a parasite.
All right. So part of why I picked that clip is because I think it's so telling at the beginning of the clip, he's trying to surrender and Venom won't let him. And gosh, if that isn't true with the clients that I work with. And I see in the chat, you asked, is it possible that the disease resistance process could be related to a combination, life trauma, mental health, and addiction? Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I know I keep saying I'm about to talk about personality disorders, mental health, and neurodivergence and brain trauma, because absolutely. This one specifically, though, I'm talking about is like this interesting one that I've seen over the 23 years I've worked with, where this is like a certain guy, and I guess I keep saying guys because I work with a lot of men, but this certain guy who doesn't really have mental illness. He doesn't really have a personality disorder to speak of. Maybe he had a pretty good childhood, but he is just overcome with the disease of alcoholism. And I think it's an important thing to just make sure that clinicians are trained on that, like that also exists, that is like a real thing. And I think another thing I'm really passionate about is that I think a lot of incoming clinicians aren't properly trained in the disease of addiction and like what alcoholism really is. And so but I love that you know, Eddie Brock's trying to surrender, and so that moment where I see clients in treatment, and it's almost like I can see that battle happening in their head, like they want to surrender, but the disease inside of them just kind of keeps saying like, hell no, like, we're not going to do this. We're not giving up our job. Like, no, we're not moving into sober living. Like, no, we're not doing that. And it's like I can see the battle in their head. It's like there's a part of them that wants to surrender, and then there's a part of them that this disease has overtaken. So it's the best way I know to kind of describe that process. So and yeah, I can send the video list, but they'll also be attached to the PowerPoint if we can get that out to you guys as well. So but yeah, I think it would be a great opportunity for those of you that work in addiction treatment, to show the video, like, do a little movie series of watching all the Venom movies and have it be, like a study on how is this a metaphor to your addiction. It would be a great fun thing to do. Okay, how to help. And again, this isn't a perfect world. Long-term treatment with consistency. It takes patience, time, and persistence to chip away at the disease. We are not doing battle with the client. We are battling the same thing he is, his alcoholism. And so that's like, again, this idea with Eddie Brock and Venom, that he's battling, like we're battling the same thing he's battling. Like he's got this thing happening inside his head that's happening without his own permission. And I think it's so important to remind your staff of that when they're so tired and they're so demoralized working, having a tough group of guys in the facility and that they're resisting the program and whatnot, is to say like, hey man, they're battling the same thing you are. Like we're both battling his alcoholism. We're both battling his addiction. And maybe it's even his we're both battling his mental illness. We're both battling his borderline personality disorder. Like he's battling it too. This is happening in a lot of ways without his permission. So united front, being a united front with all the stakeholders. Treatment team must be united through consistent communication. And so with tough, late stage, deep alcoholics and addicts like this, it's always best if there's a team, so if there's a wife, if there's a mom and a dad, if there's grown children involved, that and to get somebody through a longer term treatment, sober living, and extend the help as long as possible. A lot of times it takes teaming up with a team and really giving them not very many choices, and using as much leverage as you can, and using that intervention model and all of that, because again, they're battling something that's happening inside of them that they don't have control over. And so that's where rallying around them as a united front to battle that with them and for them is really, really important. Yeah, this is I love that, Sheila. I saw a movie a long time ago about a girl being possessed and she wrote on her stomach, "Help me." That's what I related to addiction when I first came into recovery. Absolutely. That's thank you so much for sharing that. That's a great way to put it, because it is. And it's actually really sad. And again, if you get nothing else out of this talk, I hope that you can take this back to those that you work with that are on the front lines, that, and just to remind them of that, like, this is sad. They need help. I know they're buttheads, but they need help. 12 steps, as you can tell, I love the 12 steps. There has to be a psychic change where the ideas, emotions, and attitudes that are guiding them must be completely rearranged. And again, the 12 steps is great. It doesn't have to be the 12 steps, but something, and we're going to talk about this in the next slide, but something has to give with these guys. There is no hope. They are beyond human aid. And there is no hope that they're going to get well unless something basically miraculous happens. And I'm just going to put, almost something, supernatural. And so the idea of behind the 12 steps originally was sort of like, hey, we're going to do like, write out like a guide for how to have a spiritual experience, how to have, kind of this miraculous, like, life altering change. Here's how to do that. Here's how to find God, here's how to do that. And so whether it's the 12 steps or some other program that's going to help you have some kind of psychic change or spiritual experience, being equipped with the truth, consistently reflecting back the reality of their life to them. You must use factual data and objective truth to disrupt their distorted reality. And so again, it's like just being very ho-hum about, talking about the truth, like, well, I hear you, but, your family is not willing to support you to do anything other than sober living. And, I hear you, but, you've lost your driver's license because you have 10 DUIs, or, let's remember, that you're trying to get on the liver transplant list. And, so just, so it's important, again, to team up with the families so that you have you are equipped with the truth, and so that you can consistently reflect back the reality of their life. More than anyone, these guys need to trust us and know that we are on their team. sorry, my chat got in the way, to know that we are on their team. This guy or girl has lost respect and trust from everyone in their life, even themselves. We need to give them empathy and love. And again, they're not always easy ones to do that with. And so it's, it's hard. Okay, psychic change, spiritual experience. I know I just touched on this. I want to talk a little bit more about this. In the big book, Dr. Carl Jung, a conversation that Dr. Carl Jung has is actually talked about in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is an interesting, if you've never read about it, it'd be interesting to Google it and read a little bit more about Dr. Carl Jung's connection with Alcoholics Anonymous. There's a guy that's discussed named Roland Hazard, and he's a chronic alcoholic, and he has a conversation. He goes and sees the best psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, in the nation, because his alcoholism has just taken him to his knees. And so he goes to see Dr. Carl Jung, and they tell what happens. So the doctor said to him, to Roland Hazard, "You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I've never seen one single case recover where that state of mind existed to the extent that it does in you." Our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed on him with a clang. He said to the doctor, "Is there no exception?" "Yes," replied the doctor, "there is. Exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begins to dominate them." And so I love this because it really describes, again, the goal of recovery. And this back to the clip of Denzel Washington. This is what has to happen. That something has to happen if you're going to stay sober for the rest of your life. And we can call it whatever we want: a psychic change, a spiritual experience, a miracle, whatever you want to call it. But what it is when it's a huge emotional displacement and a rearrangement. The ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of your lives, are suddenly cast aside, and a new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. And for anyone who knows anyone in recovery, or has worked with clients, or is in recovery themselves, knows that really, it's like the person that existed before is no longer there, and it's somebody with a whole new way of living and a whole new way of being. And ultimately, that's what we're all trying to crack the code, right? Like, how do we get this person here? And this is true with personality disorders too, right? Like, the hope is that, like, how do we help them, like, see that they can view life differently and they can do life differently? So if you didn't know that, for those of you that don't have a lot of education and experience on the 12 steps, like, this is ultimately the whole point, it's like spiritual experience for dummies. And again, it can be through, Smart Recovery Church, Dharma Recovery. There's a million different ways, but the 12 steps was just one method that they took, that they said, like, hey, let's like write this down kind of in a format for dummies. Okay, personality disorders. We keep talking about that. So let's dive into that a little bit. And we're not going to do like I'm not going to do a full DSM overview on every personality disorder. I'm just going to more talk functionally about kind of how it shows up in treatment settings and in private practice settings. Personality disorders significantly contribute to treatment resistance in addiction settings by introducing complex and entrenched patterns of behavior, emotion, and interpersonal difficulties that directly interfere with recovery efforts, right? So if you look at what I was just talking about, that like what we need in order to stay sober permanently is this like major emotional displacement where like we like view the world in a whole different way. And like the number one reason why people have a hard time doing that is going to be personality disorders. It's like it's literally like a lesion and a malignancy that gets in their way of being able to like see themselves and others kind of in an accurate way. So this is a tough one, right? This gets in the way of the whole process. Personality disorders are lifelong ingrained patterns of inner experience and behavior. These deeply rooted patterns are inherently resistant to rapid change and require long-term specialized therapy, often frustrating both the patient and the provider in a standard addiction treatment timeline. So I'm going to read that again. So, I mean, when you work in a 30-day treatment center, or let's say, someone's coming in for private counseling, in your private practice once a week. I mean, these are lifelong ingrained patterns of inner experience behavior. Deeply rooted patterns are inherently resistant to rapid change and require long-term specialized therapy. So, I mean, any literature you read, I mean, the old school, therapy for someone with borderline personality disorder is like, years and years of like deep psychoanalysis, psychoanalyzing, with a New York Freudian psychiatrist. I mean, these are very, very like lengthy processes to help somebody change the entire way that they view the world and view themselves. And so when we get this kind of person in our program for 30 days, it's incredibly frustrating for the patient and the provider to work within that timeline. And it's just unrealistic that we're going to be able to, have a miraculous change of their entire perception of life in that amount of time. So then what do we do? Again, how does this show up as resistance in treatment settings? I think it's important to understand that oftentimes this shows up as collision with staff. So instead of resisting the program, we talked about the conscious resistance, where this is stupid, I don't need to be here, I don't have addiction, I just had an accident, whatever. This personality disorders often look more like collision with specific people. So instead of resisting the program, people with personality disorders often resist specific people on staff, with blame, chronic complaints of being treated unfairly. They get into it with roommates, other staff members, whatnot. So that's one way that shows up. Patients with borderline personality disorder often exhibit intense, unstable relationships, including with their therapist. They may quickly they may quickly idealize and then devalue staff, leading to emotional strain for providers and making a consistent therapeutic alliance difficult to establish and maintain. This can manifest as frequent crisis or demands for special attention. So I see your comment, Mark. Can you talk about the unique resistance with adolescents? I personally don't specialize in adolescents. I mean, I have worked with a handful of 17-year-olds. I do have a 13-year-old son. So if you have any advice for me, I'll take it. But I mean, obviously, I've worked clinically with adolescents, but it's certainly not my area of expertise. And kind of the understanding of like the depth of the frontal lobe not being fully developed with adolescents, is like probably a whole another 3-hour talk, which again, I keep throwing out there. Maybe you can do, if this is something about, you can throw your name in the hat for a 2026 series. But that's a great question, because I mean, it's a necessary discussion, I think, to deal with resistance in adolescents, especially like, not to go on too much of a tangent, but I'm sure all of you guys have watched all the documentaries and the exposés on wilderness treatment programs and therapeutic boarding schools. And I know that, so many of you, even that have been in the industry, have watched some of our beloved facilities that we know and love get closed down because of this kind of campaign against adolescent treatment centers. And I get it, like there's been a lot of corruption and a lot of unethical treatment. But at the same time, as somebody who's been doing this work for 23 years, I watch these exposés and these documentaries, and I can like see that delicate balance that when these facilities are working with these incredibly resistant and sick adolescents, how walking that line between behavior modification and good treatment, is so difficult with adolescents. So it's a really needed discussion. So thank you for bringing up the question. And maybe that's something that we can look at for the docket in 2026. Okay. Personality disorders keep showing up in treatment. Need to control the environment. People with personality disorders in addiction settings often challenge structure and accountability by lying, exploiting, manipulating for favors, and creating drama amongst peers and staff. So oftentimes they just kind of torment the staff, about specific favors and creating drama. And it can be very, very exhausting and taxing, especially on the direct care staff. Emotional volatility and impulsivity. They have extreme highs and lows, chronic feelings of emptiness, sudden outbursts of anger and despair, and this often serves as a defense to avoid deep, vulnerable work. Classic example. I mean, we've been struggling with this with a guy at our facility right now, actually. Somebody who's just chronically telling everybody that he's suicidal and that he's gonna self-harm, never actually does it, never, but it's part of kind of that lack of emotional regulation, and also avoiding deep vulnerable work and constantly wanting to go to the hospital and kind of escape the current reality of their life. And it makes it very, very difficult, and it weighs on the staff. And I would say after about a week of that, into a 30-day stay, everybody's just over it, right? Like nobody on staff has any more time for it. It's like, whatever, then whatever, like just then do what you got to do. I mean, everyone just gets so tired. And so, when we have somebody with a personality disorder like this is where we see a lot of burnout. And then lack of remorse. These clients, especially those with narcissistic personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder, have difficulty having genuine empathy or remorse for harm caused by their addiction, resisting the core recovery principles of an honest self-appraisal. Patients with antisocial personality disorders often externalize their problems, blaming others for their difficulties rather than taking responsibility for their actions. So again, back to Denzel Washington, right? Like he sits there and he explains, like, I caused harm to these people, and I caused harm to these people, and my wife and my son, and like you can see a genuine lack of remorse as he's kind of telling his story. That's hard. It's hard for somebody with narcissism and antisocial personality disorder. There's like a built-in malignancy, kind of in their soul that makes it almost impossible, for them to do that. So again, does that make them a cannot or a will not? I mean, the end result is that oftentimes they can't. I mean, they cannot embrace and experience the principles of recovery and experience the level of depth of recovery that we want them to. And it can be very, very demoralizing and frustrating for those who are trying to help them. Okay, I want to show this clip. And again, this isn't necessarily like a perfect example, but it was the best video clip I could find that showed kind of the level of taxation that happens with somebody with a borderline personality disorder. And this isn't even actually in a therapeutic setting. It's more of like a family meeting. But for any of you, those who have seen Rachel Getting Married, it's such a good movie to see the just the destruction of addiction and personality disorders on a family. So I'm going to show this clip.
I'm sorry, but I hate her.
No, you don't hate her.
Dad, don't tell me what I don't hate. I hate the lies. I mean, she lied in rehab.
What do you mean she lied?
I mean, she lied
Rachel.
to the people who were working with her, who were trying to help her. Dad, she lies to everybody.
Where is she now?
Where am I now, Dad?
Oh, God.
Rachel!
We're in here, Kim.
Thanks for abandoning me. I had to take a taxi.
Hey, Rach. I mean, are you kidding me?
Why would anything I said or didn't say at the hospital... Jesus Christ, are they gonna play all weekend?
Norman! Boys, stop, please.
Guys, we should give it a rest. Just give it a rest. Okay, thanks.
Why would it hurt you? It wasn't about you.
Why not?
Rachel.
What? Stop, Dad. Why not? Why wasn't it about me? I mean, I was hopeful. I was on your side. I still am. I mean, do you have any idea what that means? Do you have any idea how lonely it was here with everybody gone into your terrible little world? I mean, there was nothing left. Everybody was just empty. You think that they knew I was alive or needed anything during your life. And after all that, the fights, the screaming, the blaming, the loneliness, and mom and dad, and the divorce, and the death, fucking hopefulness. I mean, and dad not even being able to listen to music anymore. You were lying about us instead of telling the truth about yourself.
God, Rach.
What is this about, girls?
Well, apparently she has a whole history of sexual molestation that we didn't know about.
What?
Kim, what's your sister saying? Did you say you were sexually molested?
It was a long time ago.
Were you?
No.
Why in God's name would you
It was
say
an
something
anonymous
like that?
exercise, and it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Dad, look at me, okay? I am right here, okay? And I am telling you that after Ethan died, I wanted her to get better or just die.
Rachel, she's better.
And no, recovery doesn't work if you lie. She knows that. I am worthless to her. She doesn't give a shit about the rest of us.
Worthless. How dare you? You're my sister. I love you guys. I need you guys, but you don't get to sit around for the rest of my life deciding what I'm supposed to be like. I mean, you weren't there. You weren't inside of my head when I was fucked up. You were certainly not there now.
Kim.
You haven't gotten any idea how I feel.
Kim, you took Ethan for granted. Okay, you were high for his life. You were not present. Okay, you were high.
Yes.
And you drove him off a bridge. And now he's dead.
Rachel, it was an accident.
Yes, I was. Yes, I was stoned out of my mind. Who do I have to be now? I mean, I could be Mother Teresa. It wouldn't make a difference what I did. Did I sacrifice every bit of love in this life because I killed our little brother?
Oh, it was an accident. It was an accident.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
Kimmy,
I'm sorry.
Kimmy, it was an accident.
Sorry.
Okay. Okay. So if you watch this entire movie, it's a great one to also watch at your facility, or recommend for a family to watch too, because it's a great study on what the disease of addiction does to families, siblings, parents, all of it. But I do think that it's a great description of borderline personality disorder. Even how she talks about lying, about being sexually abused, and just the look on her face, it's almost like I can just like feel the borderline personality disorder, kind of oozing off of her, and how difficult it is to have conversations about change with somebody who continues to, kind of emotionally take everybody hostage. And that's what happens in treatment settings as well. And so it's really, really hard. Okay, I'm gonna pull up the Q&As real quick. Just make sure I haven't missed anything before I move on. Has research been done on what has actually worked for resistant clients by asking those clients what caused them to change? I don't know. That's a great question. I don't have that. I mean, I did. So ironically, even though I gave you guys a big speech about how this wasn't a research talk, I did do some research on resistance, and most of what the research that I did on, kind of brought me back to motivational interviewing, and a lot of the research that team, as they were developing the kind of concepts and theory behind motivational interviewing, and again, back to the mandated versus voluntary treatment and whatnot, because that whole model, is essentially developed for working with resistance. But anyway, so I don't know the answer to what caused them to change, other than usually, again, if you're going with the motivational interviewing kind of theory, it's about working through their ambivalence, and as they work through their ambivalence, like finding internal motivation to actually desire something different, like from that's coming from an internal locus of control. So And then what was the phrase you used about change? It may have been is it the one recovery per person if wanted? I don't know if that's what you're asking about, but but yeah, if I can think of another one, I will get to that. So, okay. Let me click on that. Okay, so how to help when it comes to personality disorders. Again, I'm not going into like the depth of like obviously dialectical behavior therapy. I mean, there's research galore, right, on various personality disorders and modalities of help. I'm giving an overview of working in addiction treatment settings. Okay, so and again, this is like a practical guide to working with difficult clients. So by no means meant to be a comprehensive, kind of overview of all the modalities of working with personality disorders, but more of a practical sense. You've got somebody in your facility with borderline personality disorder or antisocial disorder. One of the best things that I have found is to help your staff increase their tolerance for the difficulties these clients bring. And I'm just being honest. It's like, that's where we've gotten at a lot of the facilities where it's like, hey, we've got this person for 30 days. We're not going to give them a personality transplant. Like that's not going to happen in 30 days. And so when they're being impossible, when they're creating drama, when they're, splitting and things like that, reminding each other, meaning staff, that they can't help it. This is just a symptom of their disorder. This is just what they do. And so I think consistently educating your staff on how this shows up, what splitting looks like, what these things look like, and just giving your staff comfort, like that they're not doing this on purpose. This is they're afflicted, they're suffering, they're fighting this too. This isn't what they want, but this is how it shows up. So lean into them and spend time with them and help them create belonging. Joke with them, disarm them, embrace their neediness. And I know that this is a tall order, right? But at Chapter House, the program that I run, we get a lot of guys with borderline personality disorders, and what we have learned is that you can they really they're easily redirectable if you learn how to kind of massage their need for attention and dive in with them and lean into it instead of constantly trying to kind of work against it and kind of put them in their place and make sure that they understand that like they don't get any more special attention than anyone else. Sometimes the way out is through. It's like sometimes you do give them special attention. Sometimes you do spend a little extra time with them, massage their ego a little bit and help them, take a deep breath and realize that we're on their team. And that's okay. I think that's another thing that I've learned, doing this work is that it's okay to not always have to like hold this hard line of always like kind of trying to teach and punish and whatnot. It's like, hey, you know what, little Johnny, every morning he needs an extra pat on the back and he needs to come into, I've got certain guys that always kind of come, lurk and want to kind of have a talk with me in my office, and I let them come in for 5 minutes and I just say, hey, I hear you're doing a great job, good job. Let me know if you need anything. And it's like something about that just kind of gives them a little boost. And for those narcissists that I work with. And so sometimes it's like, you don't always have to work against it. You can work with it. And I'm not sure everybody always realizes that that's allowed, that you don't always have to be trying to teach them lessons, especially when you're working on a time clock of like a 30-day program. So educate them and name their disorder. I know that there's some, different opinions on this. We definitely subscribe to, if somebody, I think it's really, really valuable to take personality disorder inventories and figure out, if we can actually do a diagnostics on them and really, tell them, hey, it looks like you meet the criteria for a borderline personality disorder. You meet the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. Let's read a book. Let's talk about this. Let's see, what does this actually look like? What's this been like to live with? And how does this show up? And then it gives you like a vocabulary and a capacity to bring back, to come back around to it and name it and say, oh, remember we talked about this last session about that unstable sense of identity that comes with borderline personality disorder and some of the paranoia. And is that what you're having? It sounds like that's what's happening again. It's like, oh yeah. And so or gives you a verbiage to be able to kind of identify when this depth of resistance is going on. And again, we just think, oh, they're just being an asshole, and it's like, no, I mean, they're afflicted, and so educating them, naming their disorder with the client and with the staff. And then with these, with people with personality disorders, peer accountability, I think is really important, and tends to hold more weight because they're so relational. And so the opportunity for them to hear from their peers and to be able to participate in kind of open feedback sessions, can be really helpful. So you have to be careful. I would always have a clinician involved, and you're gonna have some kind of peer accountability, but we have found that to be really helpful. All right, and staff must be a united front and communicate well to avoid splitting. You can even play good cop and bad cop with staff strategically. And again, you'd have to, again, that's part of that kind of, it doesn't always have to be, that you're always trying to put them in their place. Like you can have, hey, at my facility, sometimes I get to be the good guy. It's like, we've got our director of operations who's kind of the one that's always enforcing the rules. And then they can come in my office and I'll say like, yeah, I know it's hard. I know. And he's got a tough job. And, we can kind of play off each other, I know that we're united because that's how we work as a team. But I can make the client kind of feel like I'm extra on his team. And that's not always splitting. That can be strategic kind of on the staff part, to really help a client feel like he's got someone in his corner. So, okay. And push them consistently towards their tools. People with personality disorders get sober all the time. So, I would definitely not necessarily say that this is the category of like somebody who cannot get sober. It can make it a lot more difficult, but there's a lot of people I know that are afflicted with, serious, personality malignancies, that have long-term recovery. Doesn't mean that they're always like still people's favorite person to be around, but they can establish sobriety and they can have success in remaining substance free. And so pushing them consistently towards their tools and helping them at least be able to learn how to function maybe within that support group, within that 12-step community is, I think can be a big strategic part of the treatment plan. All right, let's talk about mental illness. This is one that I have kind of in my face on a daily basis with what we do at Chapter House. In my program here in Dallas, we work with a lot of guys that are schizoaffective, schizophrenic, bipolar, and, we're a transitional living program, so we're definitely not a mental hospital or psychiatric unit or anything. But we get guys that are struggling. Guys that have been doing drugs and also have a significant Axis 1 diagnosis, and it's tough. It's very, very tough. And so this is where a lot of kind of my passion for this topic has come from when we talk about the can-nots and the will-nots, because we get guys that are very, very limited. And also have to figure out how do we help them get sober, and how do we help their family and realize that they deserve help too, and that they're worth help. The challenge for addiction treatment providers working with individuals who have co-occurring thoughts and mood disorders is that standard insight-oriented methods and motivation-based action plans often fail because the disorder's symptoms directly undermine the client's capacity for change. Specifically, cognitive impairments like disorganized thinking and a lack of insight make complex self-reflection nearly impossible, while the profound apathy of depression and the paralyzing fear of the symptom return override the motivation needed for long-term sobriety. So that's a pretty quick summary of that. How it shows up as resistance in treatment settings. Med noncompliance. So we're all probably aware of this. Clients with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder are often unwilling to comply with their necessary medication. And so it's maddening because, the clients that we know could get relief from their psychosis or their mania and their disorganized thinking don't want to take the medicine. And so That's half the battle a lot of times when you have them kind of in the contained environment of a treatment program. True delusion. Clients are often clinically delusional about the objective facts about their life. We see false beliefs and blaming family as a result. And so what I mean by this is I'm not talking about like alcoholic delusion, like, oh, I'm not an addict or it's not that bad. I mean, we're talking about like true literal delusion, like somebody will come in and have an entire reality about objective facts that are not true. We have relationships with mom and dad and they tell us, this happened and this happened. And then they went to college and then they moved home and the individual is sitting there telling us an entire different, kind of timeline of what's happened that's objectively not true. And so we're dealing with true delusion, and it's very, very difficult because it's like we're not even working on the same planet of facts. And so again, trying to tackle sobriety in the context of that can be really, really hard. When a client apathy and anhedonia. When a client is med compliant, when they are med compliant, they have unfortunate negative side effects that can make the client have low energy, be unmotivated, and flat. So it's like this double whammy, right? Like even if you get them to take their meds, the meds render them, with a level of apathy and anhedonia that make it hard to get a lot going on, in the way of kind of adult functioning. And then paranoia and suspicion. The client may believe they are being spied on. They may believe they're being followed, leading to terrorizing fear and an absolute refusal to follow certain directions. And so within the context of the facility that I work at, we run into this a lot where, again, it's hard to get a lot of work done when they may not be floridly psychotic, but there's an undertone of paranoia and suspicion going on that make it really hard to focus on sobriety. Cognitive difficulty and poor insight. Symptoms like poor concentration or racing thoughts can make it difficult to absorb information from educational groups or follow complex treatment instructions. So, again, a lot of us are, running facilities that, we may have a perfectly functional, high intelligent, person and one seat in a group, and this person sitting next to them in the group, has schizoaffective, is on a long-acting injectable, and can barely stay awake, and so you're trying to kind of handle these two different types of resistance, right? So your facility staff may get very frustrated because little Johnny keeps sleeping in groups. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, he's not just being a butthead, I mean, he's schizoaffective and he's on, like a massive dose of Invega, and he's not doing a great job of functioning in group. And so, but again, to staff that are trying to effectively run a group, that's very frustrating, and they can categorize that as resistance. And so it's really important as a treatment team to continue to talk about this stuff and to talk about, hey guys, he's not being resistant. He's sick. He's sick. And this is not a choice he's making. He's not well. And so I think, so that's why I'm talking about this, is especially, for our line staff, our direct care staff, who may not have a master's degree and understand all the ins and outs of apathy and anhedonia and schizoaffective and all of that, to really be able to explain in a way that makes sense to them, why this individual refuses to get out of bed, or why this individual refuses to do their chore. Okay, I am going to show this clip from Silver Linings Playbook.
Is that song really playing?
Weird music sometimes.
That song is killing me. Could you please turn it off?
I can't.
What do you mean you can't?
I don't have the controls. I'm sorry.
Did Dr. Timbers put you up to this? Is there a speaker here? Is it the speaker here?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll fix all this, okay? That was a messed up thing you did, Dr. Patel, all right? That's a messed up thing. I'm sorry, but that's...
You can call me Cliff, please.
Yeah, well, Cliff, that's not the way you're supposed to meet people, okay? You should write that down in your I don't know, what do you have, a little book you write stuff down in?
I'm sorry about that song. I just wanted to see if it was still a trigger for you.
Bravo, it's a trigger.
Okay. I worked really hard to find a clip for this section, that was really relatable. And this one was like, okay, this is actually something that I could see happening in my facility. And I love it because, and it actually goes to your question, Mark. Mark says, question, what do you do when these individuals are making the program so disruptive that other clients can't get what they need? And so exactly why I show this clip is that the end result is disruption. Right. I mean, we can call it whatever we want, like, hey, he's not being resistant, he's ill, and we can explain it, but the end result is often still very disruptive. And so again, your facility gets to have its own rules, and it gets to have, like boundaries and absolutely, like if somebody's, tossing things around in group and whatnot, they may not be stable enough to participate in services right now, or, and whatnot. So, but again, I also have, there has to be somewhere for these people to get help. And so that's, one of my passions is trying to consult with facilities to look at there are some facilities that want to meet the needs of these people that continue to get kicked out of programs, because somebody like that, even in this clip, would get oftentimes kicked out. It's like, hey, he's being disruptive, he's got to go. And it's like, okay, well, what do we do with him? Well, put him in the hospital. Well, he doesn't necessarily need to go to the hospital. He's not like floridly psychotic. He's just problematic. He gets paranoid, and so trying to consult with programs to figure out, for programs that want to be able to work with these types of difficult clients, how can you train the staff in ways that, give them a tolerance level and a level of understanding and empathy that they're willing to have. And so like at the facility I work for at Chapter House, like we work with a lot of guys like this video clip, and we don't kick them out, and so again, we have certain tolerance levels of what we can and can't deal with, but also being able to just have some tools in our toolkit, which I'm going to talk about here in just a second, about kind of how to help with some tools in the toolkit. So, okay, perception. It's easy to interpret symptoms through a lens of behavioral choice or moral failing. Behavioral misinterpretations, lazy, unmotivated, when they observe a lack of activity or initiative. We run into this a lot with medicated clients that have mental illness. Manipulative, when attempts to engage or encourage are met with resistance or failure. And failing to launch, when an adult child cannot achieve independence in basic life skills, work, hygiene, finance. The underlying question, why won't they just try harder? This perspective, hang on, keep doing this. This perspective fails to recognize that the will is impaired by the illness itself. And so, I just had a conversation with a mom the other day, that actually I put this slide in because of this. So I have a private client who has schizophrenia, and his mom, he has schizophrenia, like there's no question, but he's also in recovery from addiction. And he's about to finish his semester of community college, and he suddenly wants to drop out of community college because he's supposed to be getting a job at the end of community college. And so his mom and his sisters think that he still sometimes is making it up. He's making up the symptoms of his schizophrenia. And they're very, very frustrated because, of course, right before he is supposed to finish school and start working, now suddenly he's, hearing voices again, or now suddenly they're very disgusted with him and his behavior, and it's very frustrating and maddening. And I had to talk to her for about a half hour and just say, hey, this is like what schizophrenia looks like. Like, he's not making it up. This is literally what it looks like. And yes, it's frustrating and it's maddening, but this is what it looks like. And so in this clip, I have a different dimension. High functioning individuals don't even have a category in their head for understanding the symptoms of mental illness. I often say it exists in like a fourth dimension of reality that can't be comprehended. The same coping skills, grit, flexibility, motivation that exists in them or us cannot be applied to their sick loved ones. So, this mom and her daughters that I'm talking to, they think like, can't he just, get out of bed? Can't he just not stay up all night and play video games? Can't he just go get a job? Like they look at him and he looks normal to them. and it's like they can't, their mind doesn't have the capacity to it's like a different dimension that they can't enter into. And we struggle with that with staff too. That staff looks at the guys just sleeping in group or the guy that won't do his chore, and you look at him and you just think he's lazy. He's an asshole. He's not motivated. He doesn't want anything different. It's so easy to put somebody in that box because that's what makes sense in our mind. Because if we were acting like that, it would be because we were being an asshole. It would be because we were being lazy. But when you're dealing with somebody with schizoaffective disorder or schizophrenia, it's not the case. And so this is, again, another one of my soapboxes. We see the same struggle with elderly and aging parents. I don't know if you guys have had an elderly or aging parent, but I've seen a lot of my friends even. And it's always hard, right, when you're in the depth of it. Adult children are often very annoyed and exasperated with their parents' unwillingness to do things that would help them. While not understanding that this is what dementia looks like, this is it. So I have a friend whose mom has dementia, and she is constantly like angry with her mom. Like she's genuinely like disgusted with her because she won't get up and go on a walk or go exercise, and she won't eat better food. And it's like, I look at my friend and I'm like, hey, Kathy, like that. Your mom has dementia. Like, this is what it looks like. Like she's not going to get up and go on a walk. Like she has dementia, and so it's the same frustration with treatment providers. And so education is like of the utmost importance with this stuff, and educating, and just continuing to have like voices of reason on your staff that can just remind people that are in the trenches with these guys, like, hey, you're doing a great job. You're doing a great job. Like this guy's really sick. This guy's really sick. Okay. The clinical reality, like I just said, this is what mental illness looks like. Negative symptoms, the WALTs. These are the most commonly misinterpreted. They represent the absence of normal function, not the choice to be idle. Avolition, lack of motivation, drive. This is the clinical term for what looks like laziness. It's the inability to initiate and persist in goal-directed activities. Anhedonia, inability to feel pleasure. This can make any attempt at productive activity seem pointless, further reinforcing a lack of motivation. I never know how to say this. Alagogia, poverty of speech, can be misinterpreted as being difficult or uncommunicative. Cognitive symptoms, the CANTs. These impair the ability to plan, sequence, and execute daily tasks. Executive dysfunction, the impaired ability to plan, organize, manage time, and switch between tasks. This makes simple things like budgeting, cooking, or managing a class schedule functionally impossible. So the hard reality, and this is kind of how I want to conclude the part about mental illness, is individuals with mental illness can be exasperating and impossible. And the hard truth is they don't do well in life. They are low functioning. And I mean, that is, I can't tell you how many times I just had a conversation with another mom of a client who's at Chapter House, who just the hard reality of what she's looking at with her son. He is sober. He's been sober for, I think, 6 months, but he has schizoaffective disorder. He's on a long-acting injectable. And, he's working, I believe, at Costco. He's doing better than he's ever done, but like, he's not setting the world on fire. He's not going to law school. He's not doing the things that she hoped her son would do at this age, and she's, and so we've had to have some hard conversations, about just realizing that, like, hey, this is what good looks like for him, and really lowering expectations and meeting expectations. The symptoms of these illnesses often attack the very parts of the brain responsible for will, initiation, and basic competence. It's not a character flaw, it's a neurological impairment. The behavior is exasperating. We must remember the cause. Shifting the source of blame from the loved one's character to the illness itself is imperative. And it is a hard reality. So how to help? Focus on function over insight. Again, we've talked about how it's very, very hard for these guys to have deep insight-oriented change. Instead, prioritize practical skills and improve daily life over deep psychological introspection. Use long-acting injectable medications where appropriate to bypass the daily challenge of oral pill adherence. We've had a lot of success, with Invega shots, Abilify shots, things that can be long-acting, because it takes off that the med compliance kind of issue. You only have to deal with med compliance one time a month, and so. Hold on, I'm looking at the chat to see if there's anything I missed. Okay, yeah. Okay, lean into their quirks, make time for them and have a good time with them. And this is, and what I mean, I've got some great guys on my staff. I've got a director of operations named Will, and we've got some quirky guys. And that's what the other thing I've learned is that, and we'll talk about this a little bit when I get to the neurodiverse clients as well, but some of these dudes are weird and they're funny and they're quirky. And, what we've learned at Chapter House is to lean into it and kind of have fun with it, not in a mocking way, but in a, like a lot of them have very specific, areas of interest or, we even with some of their delusions, like we had a guy that was very, very obsessed with like Russia and the KGB and even though, again, he wasn't floridly psychotic, he just had some lingering, kind of delusions and paranoia. And we just sort of entered into it with him. And we would, we just said, hey, man, Will would always say, hey, man, if the KGB shows up here, like, they got nothing on me. Like, we got you, man. Like, we're going to protect you. The KGB doesn't have any place here. And he would just kind of be like, okay, that's good to know. Like, it was like sometimes the answer is more simple. It's like it didn't have to be, it doesn't always have to be these deep, super psychodynamic psychological solutions. It's like, hey, sometimes they just need to hear that, like, hey, we're going to protect you from the Russians. We're no Russians allowed here. And again, I mean, kind of being funny, but it's like that kind of made a big difference. And it was like, hey, for that day, that kid felt better, and that was really. We have another kid that when he's running a little hot, he likes to kind of do robotic moves, and he's always doing, the robot. And so we all just walk past him and kind of do the robot with him. And, and it's like we've learned to just enter into it and have fun with it. And also like genuinely as a staff enjoy them and enjoy their quirks. And so I just, I think it doesn't always have to be so serious. So having a highly flexible approach kind of goes back to what I was just saying. It's like, hey, they don't always, just because they're talking about the KGB and the Russians doesn't always mean you have to like throw them in the hospital. Sometimes it's like, it's okay. Yeah. I mean, we can talk about the Russians, the KGB. We don't have to get you hospitalized or, just being more flexible and not so black and white. Obviously safety's always got to be of the utmost depending on your level of care and your type of facility, but being flexible, and it just doesn't always have to be so black and white, and really getting to know your specific client and what makes them tick and what helps them. Education and managing expectations of staff and key stakeholders. Again, I've mentioned this of just we have to have a lot of hard talks, of like, hey, mom, this is like, this might be the best he can do. Like working at Costco might be the best he's going to do. And like, that's great, and having conversations about maybe it's time to look into getting somebody on Social Security disability just in case, and maybe it's time to hire an attorney and start that process. And so there's just managing expectations. And then again, I mean, this whole talk, I think, has a lot to do with managing the staff expectations and educating staff so that they really understand, what we're looking at. Okay, neurodivergence and brain trauma, and to be honest, I've actually never seen this movie, so it's one of the things I need to do after I'm done with this talk. But it's called Jeff Who Lives at Home, and I tried so hard to find a good clip for this section, and I loved this clip. And again, it kind of speaks to the quirky guys. I'm not necessarily even talking about like level 4 autism, but just guys that are different, and failure to launch and I thought this was a great one.
With Revolut, you can grow your money faster with up to 5.5% APY paid monthly. And access it whenever you want. Find money freedom with Revolut.
Hello?
Mom?
Jeff?
Hi.
You know you're supposed to say hello when you pick up the phone.
Yeah, I know. I thought that maybe you were somebody else, but you're not.
What do you do in the basement? You're not cleaning it.
You really want to know? You didn't like it last time we had this
Okay,
conversation.
no, you're right. I don't. Did you get the wood glue?
What are you talking about?
I left you a note on the kitchen counter.
I haven't been upstairs.
One of the shutters on the pantry is broken, and I need you to fix it.
You know, I'm kind of busy right now, so
All I
maybe...
want for my birthday is for you to get your ass off that couch, and you get on the bus, and you go to the Home Depot.
Couch.
You come home, you fix the shutter before I get home, or you're going to find someplace else to live.
Fine.
Fine. Good. You got it? Do you understand?
Yes, Mom! Okay!
Love you. Goodbye.
Did you just hang up on me?
Okay, so if we were all in a room together, I'd have you guys raise your hands and tell me how many of you have worked with someone like that. But I feel like every other client is like that. We always joke about we work with a lot of young adults plus a lot of like guys in their 40s that live in mom's basement, and so and some of that's just failure to launch, but some of it definitely falls in the category of neurodivergence. And I threw in here, and this is just going to be a really brief section, and then I'm wrapping up. But I threw in brain trauma just because I didn't want to leave that out, but definitely not going to go into that. But I especially in the last 10 years have been working with a lot more traumatic brain injuries, and so wanted to just maybe make a mention to that. So how people with neurodivergence / brain trauma show up as resistance in treatment settings. Environmental and circumstantial sensitivities. They hyperfocus on one particular restriction or regulation. Additionally, they may have sensory overload, which can be misinterpreted as willful resistance. So like, for example, I've got a guy right now at Chapter House who, we don't allow video games at Chapter House in stage 1. And he has autism and specific hyperfixation on his Nintendo Switch. And when I say hyperfixation, I'm talking like DEFCON 3 next level hyperfixation. And it is the only thing he talks about, the only thing he cares about. And we have been literally unable to be effective with him, short of figuring out how to let him have some time on his Nintendo Switch. And so, while some programs would just say like, sorry, bud, like you just can't have your Nintendo Switch. It's part of the rules, sorry, you can leave, our facility, has made a way to figure out a way to like give him some time every day with his Nintendo Switch. And again, it's, our, Chapter House is really unique in that we have the ability to do that. And I understand that not every facility has the ability to do that, but, but being able to help somebody who has these very specific hyper fixations and hyper focus. Again, I think a lot of facilities would see that as just like, he's just not willing to get with the program. He's not willing to follow the rules. He's resistant. Again, I think, with education and understanding, you can really be able to look at that differently. So, compulsiveness, finding it difficult to compromise in areas that are ritualistic and compulsive for them. Back to the Nintendo Switch. I mean, these things can be very compulsive. Anyone with autism and different levels of neurodivergence is gonna have all kinds of different ways that this shows up for them. It can be cleanliness, germophobia, very specific environmental things like bed, certain types of towels, certain types of sheets, certain types of clothing, things like that we run into. So, okay, communication difficulties. People with neurodivergence, autism spectrum may struggle with expressing themselves literally. They may have tics, they may have stutters, they may have the inability to literally, get their words out. And so, so that can be viewed as resistance. I've heard several staff members say, well, I asked him, he just stared at me. He just didn't even answer my question. I mean, I think we need to kick him out. And it's like, hey, buddy, he's got autism. Like that's why he was staring at you. He wasn't trying to punk you out. He has autism. So, executive functioning deficits. They may genuinely have difficulty completing tasks, organizing thoughts, or arriving on time, which is perceived as noncompliance or lack of caring. So, things that we think are basic tasks, they show up at treatment, we hand them the schedule and tell them to be at group on time, but they have a really difficult time with basic executive functioning. And then relentless communication. These clients can be taxing on staff because of their relentlessness around their specific area of focus. So, I mean, we have clients that will literally come to the tech office door 14 times in a 2-hour period of time, asking the same question. Now, remind me again, when am I going to get my Nintendo Switch? Now, you said, is it 5 minutes or is it 10 minutes? And they just keep, it is just, and again, not every facility is going to be even willing to take guys like this. And I get that, but for facilities that want to be able to be helpful to people that are neurodivergent, it's going to have to require a certain level of, of compromise and education with your staff. So, how to help. Make time for them, engage them, lean into them. So this is sort of the same spiel I gave about the mental illness, right? Is that, instead of just being annoyed with our Nintendo Switch guy, like we had a guy sit down with him and play with him. It's like, hey, make time for him. Why does Fortnite on his Nintendo Switch mean so much to him? What is that? Why is that such an important level of connection for him? It would be easy for us to just, say like, hey, you don't fit into the box of our program and just be annoyed with him. But instead it's like, let's lean into him. Trial and error, see what they're capable of. So, a lot of this is even when it comes to employment and school, it's like, okay, now you're sober. We've got you off the marijuana. Let's start a class at the community college and see if you can pull it off. We don't know. Maybe it'll be a disaster. Maybe he doesn't have the capacity, but maybe he does, so sometimes you just have to, hey, let's go get a job at the grocery store as a bagger and see, can we make it? Is that going to work? Maybe he won't, maybe he'll end up like, in the bathroom banging his head against the wall. Maybe he won't, maybe he'll love it, so it's a lot of trial and error, and we're just going to push the limits and see what he's capable of. Modify the environment, give them written plans, use books on tape, fidget toys, allow them to sit outside the circle, use experiential and artistic therapy, etc. So if you're going to work with neurodivergent clients, you're going to have to modify the environment. And again, this isn't, I want to just kind of make a quick thing is that it's not as easy as like, well, my facility accepts neurodivergent people or my facility doesn't. Like, trust me, you're going to have neurodivergent people in your facility, whether like you're an official autism facility or not. This is on such a spectrum, and understand, being able to dive in and understand the level of quirkiness and neurodivergence somebody has is going to be in front of you no matter what facility you have. Co-regulate, sit shoulder to shoulder instead of facing. So this is something a lot of our therapists use, is when somebody's hyperventilating or kind of rocking back and forth, or they're really like, flipping out about something, is co-regulate with them. Hey, let's go on a walk together around the office. Let's go get a snack together. Let me sit next to you. Let's listen to, what's your favorite song? Let's listen to your favorite song together. And so, co-regulating is really, really important. And then again, back to, my big soapbox, manage staff expectations. Hey, this guy's, he won't even pay attention in the when we go to the AA meeting at night. You know, he keeps walking in and out and going to the bathroom over and over again. Yeah, dude, he's autistic. You know, like why don't you go check on him instead of just like complaining about him? Why don't you go walk to the bathroom with him and see what's going on? Maybe he's got some anxiety. Like let's help him. you know, and so. Okay, so that's really it on my talk. I know that Zach, has a few questions that maybe you were gonna bring out that I've maybe missed, and so I will let you tell me what I need to answer, Zach.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Heidi. And seeing the comments coming in right now, a lot of people are being very appreciative already, giving kudos to the presentation. Of course, we've had lots of requests for copies. In case you missed it in the chat, y'all, we're going to send in the post session email. You'll get the link for your evaluation. You'll also have a copy of the PowerPoint as well as a link to the recording, so you can go back and watch it again. But before we get there, we still have some time. We still have a few minutes. Let's get some questions from you. So please, if you want to use the chat, you can. It's going to fly by really, really fast. I'll try to grab it. But I really encourage you to use the Q&A section of your Zoom. Put in some questions that you have. I have been keeping track of a few that have already passed us by. So I want to kind of lean into a little bit of where you ended your session. One of the last things I heard you talking about was managing those staff expectations. That was the last bullet point on your last slide. So, you've given a lot of feedback during the presentation about how you train up your staff to really work with the resistance and truly meet people where they're at, which is absolutely the expectation to me of the helping profession. Can you maybe give us some feedback? We have a lot of folks on the call that are likely supervisors of clinicians trying to get their license, or they're administrative supervisors of people at the agencies they might work at and things like that. We've all had, if you've worked with a team, you've long enough, you've had employees that just are really struggling with getting some of the concepts down. So can you maybe point to particular challenges you've seen among members of your team, some supervisory skills you've used, and maybe some resources you've leaned into in order to help increase that insight about how to work with that level of resistance?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is. I mean, and I think supervision is like the most important part of this whole thing, especially with the clinicians, because every single clinician is going to have their own kind of level of countertransference going on. And so the ability to dive into their specific story and what makes them tick, and what models they're effective at working with and what they're not. But I think it becomes very apparent pretty quickly after you start supervising somebody, where their gifts are and where they aren't. And so oftentimes I know when they come into my office complaining about the same client over and over again, right? That like we've hit on something, there's something about this that is making you tick. And so, there's always two things, right? And this could be another talk for another day, on countertransference, right? Is what is it about this specific type of client that is causing this reaction in you? You know what I mean? Like, gosh, it seems like it really makes you angry, when this guy keeps falling asleep in group. Like, what do you think that's about? Like, why is it, I understand that it's frustrating, but it seems like your reaction to this is exaggerated. Tell me about that, and diving into that is kind of in the clinical supervision realm. But then again, back to what we're talking about is just continuing to give them assignments and kind of force them to build that empathy and that understanding through education about different diagnoses, and it's like, and giving them different tasks. And hey, if maybe they're over medicated, maybe you need to go talk to the psychiatric nurse practitioner when he's here on Tuesday about this medication and research this medication a little bit. Maybe you and the client, so helping them understand all the things that are at play. It's so different being a therapist in a facility than it is being a private practice therapist. It's so I think that's another disservice, right? In graduate school, when we're not prepared for for all of the things. We think, we're just going to get out of school and sit with a client for an hour a week and have like these great therapeutic discussions. And then you end up working in a facility where like you're trying to run group therapy, you're doing education, you're doing family calls, you're having to do reports, and you're doing all these things that you weren't really trained for necessarily in graduate school. And you're dealing with medications that maybe you don't know anything about. And so I think a lot of that too is just managing expectations. And I always say working in addiction treatment is being like, it's half being a teacher, it's half camp counselor, it's half mom, and it's half therapist, well, a quarter, I guess, of all of those things. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but it's, managing expectations and educating.
Yeah, no, I think that's very appreciative dialogue there. I think good call outs for supervisors to always to look at what's the role of the supervisee in that dynamic with the client. Resistance, usually has two forces working against each other. What's the role of that other force, our side of this? Because there's always opportunities for approaching that resistance, whether it's a cannot or a will not. My response doesn't really change that much because because it really doesn't matter what the source is.
I could have talked a lot about like how to figure out who's a cannot and a will not, and at the end of the day, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. That's always been my approach to it too.
Yeah.
It's much the same way. When we think about which one came first, kind of the chicken or the egg with addiction. It's like, is it addiction came out of trauma, or trauma comes out of addiction? These are so intermeshed as concepts. At the end of the day, my focus is on the treatment and the care of what's right in front of me. The why doesn't usually come into play as much. My response is going to be the same, right? I think that's where when we default in what we do learn, and that's in unconditional positive regard and the radical acceptance. And if you can live there, you can roll with a lot of resistance naturally. I think it's when we try to put things into boxes that things just don't work out really well.
Absolutely.
But speaking of trauma, as I just said, can you maybe speak to maybe through the lens of trauma, some of the activation of resistance, or maybe it's a re-traumatization that happens during the course of care that increases that level of resistance presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, treatment can be very triggering. Especially for somebody with like genuine trauma, where like their physical and emotional safety has been threatened at various times in their life. They've witnessed trauma and experienced trauma. Being put in the kind of pressure cooker of treatment will bring out, a demon inside of them too, and so I think, with good, assessments on the front end and really understanding, again, I didn't dive into that a lot today just because there's only so much time, but and trauma is, there's so many people that are such amazing trauma specialists. I don't try to pretend to have that be like my absolute area of expertise. However, there's no question that it contributes to resistance in a way that could be really misconstrued by a treatment team, that would say she's just not willing, she's just not willing, and she's just, resisting this whole process. And it's like, hey, if there's somebody who's willing to dive into her story and really take the time to understand like why this process might be so triggering for her, it could change everything.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned assessment there, which I don't think about assessments without then thinking about the direction of the treatment plan. When we're working with resistance, sometimes formulation of truly collaborative goals becomes a challenge into itself. Getting somebody to buy into some objectives and interventions, depending on their presentation and care, can be quite challenging. And can you maybe give any feedback that you may have given this to your team over time about how to make these bite-sized, digestible, acceptable pathways forward with folks with resistance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's got to be one step at a time. It's like we're not like I say, we're not going to give somebody a personality transplant in 30 days. But what we can do is hopefully expose them to the process of recovery, get them stabilized on maybe some good meds, and make a plan for a solid sober living situation. and hope that we can set them up for some success. And so, yeah, I think understanding and back to trauma, it's like, that's a lot of why, even in a 30-day setting, it's like, there's only so much you can dive into trauma. Right. And so being able to understand and make a long-term plan, I think is so much part of the back to assessment and discharge planning, and also being willing to call it if you need to, like back to what you were talking about with trauma, is like realizing, hey, a weekend, hey, this woman really needs to be in a gender specific female only program, this isn't going well, so, I mean, let's look at it and figure it out and realize that, like, hey, we didn't realize this, but like, we get to pivot at this point, and we can get her where she needs, or get him where he needs. And so, yeah, I think the treatment planning process is we get so into making that such a mundane part of our paperwork, and realizing that, like, it actually really, really matters. Like, we can actually really take this assessment and look at, like, okay, what can we do in 30 days? And what do we need to look at more long-term?
And I think just approaching things as a long term in itself, I think puts walls up, and how we address. I'm not asking you to make commitments for the rest of your life. I can't make commitments for what I'm going to be doing next year, but what can I make a commitment for today, this week, in much more immediate time frames. And in thinking about that, I was looking at some of the messages we got earlier. At an earlier part of your session, you were talking about accessibility of resources like the 12 steps, and you've given throughout the presentation a lot of references from the big book. And in my experience and what I was seeing in the chat, a lot of people who have outright resistance just with the notion of going or being exposed to a 12-step focused meeting or literature because of, I'm going to put it this way, the God issue of, I don't believe in God. And that's enough without knowing anything more about the 12 steps that I'm not going to participate in that. And one of my feedback I wanted to give, but then I want to get your impression about this as well, is whenever I've been confronted with that immediate response, to me, we need to dig a little bit deeper here, because is there some spiritual trauma that may have happened that this person is carrying? Right. Like, why have that reaction just the way it is? And, our world is, very, very much, at least my perception of it has widened up in our resources in this space, where there are not only 12-step models. There's smart recovery. There are other approaches that are more agnostic in their approach. But at the end of the day, I don't want people to lose the opportunity for the different messages. I think we have to hear things from a lot of different sources. But in kind of your experience, because I know that obviously through the presentation, 12 steps are very much paramount to your approach to recovery. What are some tips you've given people to address that initial resistance to the spirituality?
Like you said, I mean, I think it's everything is it's like they're telling on themselves. So I mean, that's the first thing. It's like, okay, great, then that's everything I need to know. Like, let's dive into. Tell me all about that. Tell me about where this anger comes from, this resistance, and tell me about. I have so many questions after that. It's like, at that point, I don't even care about whether you ever do the 12 steps or not. Like, let's look at what you just told me. About who you are and where this bitterness comes from, or this resistance, or this trauma, and this trigger, and so and I think that's what so many people miss too. And again, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I think there's so many different ways to get sober, and and the 12 steps is one of them. But what I do think people miss is that so much of the literature in the 12 steps is geared towards people that have no interest in talking about God and kind of unpacking that, and so yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity there with like good skill and good therapeutic work to really get to know somebody and get curious. And I think that's everything. And also being able to connect with them on a human level, and that's what I would say. I know we only have a couple minutes left, but I'm not afraid to tell somebody, to just be human with them and just say, like, I wouldn't want to be here either. I don't want someone to take my cell phone away. I don't want to not be able to watch what I want to watch on TV. Like, no one wants that. You know what I mean? Like, nobody wants that many rules. Like, so, and I think it's like, it's okay to be honest and to just say, I don't want to be told I have to do something, go to a meeting every night for the rest of my life either. No one wants to do that. So, to just get curious and be human.
Yeah. It's all about balancing choices we all get to make in everything we do. I think that that's a good place to end it. We've had a lot of good feedback. I appreciate everybody's participation throughout the day through the chat. It's always great to have this level of interaction whenever we get to see, like I said at the top, so many familiar names, so many newcomers with us here. Again, my colleagues have been putting the link in the chat a couple of times. We'll do it a few more times so you can grab it right there before you choose to sign off. And also know that you're going to get an email with the evaluation link for those who go to your registration. Be on the lookout for that, because that message is going to have the thing you've all been asking for: copy of the PowerPoint, link to the video, and it's going to have that evaluation link again. Please make sure you do that within the next 30 days. Go ahead and knock it out today, and then we'll get you your certificate, start those processing over the next couple of weeks. Be patient with us as we process those out. Lovely to interact with you in the eval. Give us some feedback on what you want to see more of in 2026. We're going to do ethics again mid-year. We're going to come up with some topics that we haven't done before, and we're going to revisit some areas that are needing some refresh, so that you can get exposed to some things you may have heard before, but with some newer information that we're going to add to them. So please take that opportunity to let us know what you like and what you want to see more about. We appreciate the constructive feedback. Heidi, wonderful presentation. Thank you for being part of our extended family. Welcome. And we appreciate the expertise and approach that you bring to the table. You all have a wonderful rest of your day, good weekend, and a happy end of your year. See you in 2026.